Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Jonathan Blackwater, but everyone calls me John. I've been a park ranger for 11 years now, working in the New River Gorge in West Virginia. Before this job, I fixed radar systems in the Air Force. Now I take care of all the electronic stuff, radios, GPS units, emergency beacons. It's good work, and I'm good at it. The gorge is a special place. It cuts through the mountains like a giant scar, 1,000 feet deep in some spots. The New River runs at the bottom, white water crashing over rocks that have been there since before people walked this land. Old growth trees cover the rim, and when you look down from places like Endless Wall Trail, it takes your breath away. I grew up about an hour north in Point Pleasant. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she used to tell me stories about this area. She called it a thin place. Somewhere the world was different, where things could cross over that shouldn't. I never believed those stories. I'm a man of science, electronics, radio waves, things you can measure and understand. That changed in November of 1994. It started with the emergency calls. 3 car accidents in 2 weeks on Route 19, all near the gorge entrance. Drivers said the same thing. A huge bird flew at their windshield, red eyes glowing. They swerved, crashed. Nobody died, thank God, but the stories were strange. Birds don't have red eyes. Not like that. My boss asked me to check it out. Probably some kind of interference with the radio towers, he said. You know, messing with people's vision or something. I drove out on a Thursday morning. The weather was weird. Too warm for November, with thick clouds building up. We'd been getting reports of strange lights in the sky, aurora-type stuff way too far south. The electromagnetic readings were all over the place. I parked at the trailhead and started hiking. The first thing I noticed was the quaws. No birds. None. In 11 years of working these mountains, I'd never heard silence like that. Even my radio was acting up, crackling with static every few minutes. About a mile in, I found the first sign something was wrong. My GPS unit died. Just went black. Brand new batteries. Worked fine that morning. I tried my backup radio. Nothing but static with this high-pitched whine that made my ears ring. That's when I saw the trees. Near the cliff edge, a dozen old oaks had lost all their leaves overnight. Not fallen leaves on the ground. Gone. Like something had stripped them clean. The bark was pale, almost white, like the life had been sucked right out. I took pictures with my camera. When I got them developed later, every single photo was black. The film had been somehow wiped clean. I should have left then. Should have called for backup, filed a report, let someone else figure it out. But I've always been stubborn. My Cherokee blood, my grandmother used to say. Too proud to back down from a mystery. So I kept walking. The trail follows the cliff edge for about 3 miles. Amazing views on a normal day. But that day felt wrong. The air was too still. My skin tingled like before a lightning storm, but the clouds weren't that kind of dark. Around the 2-mile mark, I found the campsite. Someone had been there recently. The fire pit still had warm ashes. But whoever it was had left in a hurry. Tent stakes in the ground, no tent, backpack spilled open, contents scattered. And in the dirt around the fire pit, prints. Not human prints, not animal prints either. Something with 3 toes, each one ending in what looked like a claw mark. The prints were huge, at least 18 inches long. And they didn't walk, they hopped, like a giant bird. That's when my radio crackled to life. Base to Ranger Blackwater. Come in, John. I grabbed the radio. This is Blackwater. Go ahead. John, we're getting some strange reports from your area. Hikers are saying they saw something flying around the gorge, something big. I looked up at the sky. Still cloudy, but getting darker. What kind of something? They're calling it a giant bird, or maybe a plane. Red lights, making no sound. You see anything like that? I was about to say no when the radio died again. Just went dead in my hand. And in the sudden quiet, I heard it. Wing beats. not the quick flutter of a normal bird. Slow, powerful beats, like helicopter blades, but quieter. The sound was coming from above the trees, but I couldn't see anything through the branches. I grabbed my camera and started recording. That's when I made my first big mistake. I followed the sound. The wing beats led me off the main trail, deeper into the forest. I should have known better. In the Air Force, we had a saying, when the radar shows something impossible, don't chase it. But I was curious, and curiosity has always been my weakness. The trees got thicker as I walked. Old-growth forest. Some of these trees probably here when my Cherokee ancestors walked these paths. The canopy was so thick I needed my flashlight even though it was only mid-afternoon. My electronics kept acting up. The camera would work for a few seconds, then die. The flashlight flickered on and off like it had a loose wire, but I'd checked it that morning. Even my watch stopped working. About half a mile in, I found the second campsite. This one was different, older. The fire pit was cold, but arranged in a perfect circle of stones. 12 stones, each one carved with symbols I didn't recognize. My grandmother might have known what they meant, but she'd been dead for 10 years. More of those strange prints were here. But these ones were different, deeper, like whatever made them had landed hard. And in the center of the camp, scratched into the dirt, was a symbol. It looked like a cross between a bird and a man. Wings spread wide, but with human legs. At the top, 2 circles that could have been eyes. Someone had drawn it, carefully, using a stick or maybe a claw. I was taking pictures of the symbol when I heard the scream. It wasn't human, wasn't animal either. It was something in between, like a hawk's cry mixed with a person yelling. The sound echoed off the cliff walls, bouncing back and forth until I couldn't tell where it came from. Then silence. I waited, listening. My heart was beating so loud I was sure whatever made that sound could hear it. Minutes passed. Nothing. I was about to head back to the trail when I heard Tom calling my name. Tom Brennan was another ranger, worked the northern section of the park. Good man, experienced hiker. We'd worked together on rescue operations before. John, where are you?" His voice was coming from deeper in the forest. That was strange. Tom knew these woods, knew to stay on the marked trails. "Tom? I'm here?" I called back. "John, you need to see this. Come toward my voice." Something felt wrong about the way he sounded. Tom was usually calm, professional. Now his voice was excited, almost frantic. I followed his calls deeper into the woods. The trees were so thick now I could barely see 5 feet ahead. My flashlight beam seemed weaker, like the darkness was swallowing the light. "Tom, keep talking so I can find you." "Over here, John. Hurry." I pushed through a stand of pine trees and found myself in a small clearing. Tom was there, but he was standing with his back to me, perfectly still. "Tom?" He didn't answer, didn't move. I walked around to face him, and my blood went cold. It was Tom's body, but his eyes were wrong, completely black, no whites at all. And he was smiling, but not a human smile, too wide, showing too many teeth. "John," he said, but the voice didn't come from his mouth. It came from above, from the trees. I looked up and saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was perched on a thick branchie, only about 20 feet up, man-shaped, but wrong. Too tall, maybe 8 feet. Arms that were also wings, covered in dark feathers. Legs like a person, but ending in claws that gripped the branch. And the eyes. 2 red circles glowing like hot coals. They were looking right at me. "John," it said again, using Tom's voice. "Don't be afraid." I ran. I crashed through the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots trying to trip me. Behind me, I could hear those slow wing beats keeping pace. Not chasing, just following. When I finally made it back to the main trail, I was bleeding from a dozen cuts. My radio was working again, crackling with voices. "Missing hiker on Endless Wall. Search and rescue, all units." Brennan's not responding. I grabbed the radio. "Base, this is Blackwater. I'm on Endless Wall Trail, heading back to parking. John, thank God. We've been trying to reach you for hours. Tom Brennan went looking for you and never came back. Did you see him? I looked back at the forest. The wing beats had stopped, but I could feel those red eyes still watching. No, I lied. I never saw Tom. But I knew he was still back there in that clearing, standing perfectly still, wearing that terrible smile. We found Tom's body 2 days later, about a mile from where I'd seen the other thing. Official cause of death was a heart attack, but Tom was 32 years old, in perfect health. And his eyes were normal when we found him. I never told anyone what I really saw. Who would believe me? A giant bird man that could mimic voices? Tom standing there with black eyes and too many teeth? But I started researching. Cherokee legends, local folklore, newspaper reports. What I found made me wish I'd stayed ignorant. People had been seeing things in these mountains for decades. Always the same description: red eyes, giant wings, man-shaped but not human. The Cherokee called it Thunderbird's warning. It appeared before disasters, before people died. The last time anyone reported seeing it was December 1967, just before the Silver Bridge coal lapsed in Point Pleasant. 46 people died when that bridge fell. Now it was back, and it had looked right at me. After Tom's funeral, I couldn't let it go. I took vacation time and drove to Charleston, spent 3 days in the state archives. What I found kept me awake for weeks. The pattern was clear once you knew what to look for. Every 30 years or so, going back to the 1800s, someone would report seeing a giant bird or flying man in the New River Gorge area. And within 2 years, something terrible would happen. 1897, sightings near the gorge. 1899, mine explosion killed 43 men. 1927, multiple reports of red eyes in the sky. 1928, flash flood wiped out 2 towns. 1937, photographer claimed to capture image of winged humanoid. Photo was too blurry to prove anything. 1939, munitions plant explosion killed 18 workers. 1967, the Silver Bridge reports I already knew about. And now 1994, which meant I had until 1996, maybe 1997, to figure out what disaster was coming. I wasn't the only one who'd noticed. Dr. Sarah Martinez from West Virginia University had been studying electromagnetic anomalies in the region for her geology research. When I contacted her, she agreed to meet. The readings had been off the charts, she told me over coffee in a diner near campus. Magnetic field fluctuations, unusual aurora activity, even minor seismic events. Something's destabilizing the local environment. I decided to trust her, told her everything. Tom, the creature, the historical pattern. I expected her to laugh or call me crazy. Instead, she pulled out a folder full of data sheets. Your dates match perfectly with my electromagnetic readings, she said. Every time there's been a major disaster in this region, the magnetic field goes wild for months beforehand. John, I think you saw something that exists partially outside our normal space-time. A being that can sense future events because it experiences time differently. We formed a plan. Sarah would bring her sensitive equipment to the gorge. We'd try to track the electromagnetic signatures, maybe predict when and where the creature would appear next. 2 weeks later, we were back on Endless Wall Trail with enough electronic gear to stock a small laboratory. Sarah's equipment immediately started picking up anomalies. Look at this, she said, pointing to her tablet screen. The magnetic field is fluctuating in a perfect spiral pattern, centered somewhere deeper in the forest. It's like something is bending space itself. We followed the readings off-trail, Sarah watching her instruments while I kept lookout. The deeper we went, the stranger things became. Trees grew in impossible directions, bent at angles that should have killed them. The ground felt soft under our feet, like walking on a trampoline. And then Sarah's equipment died. All of it at the same time. That's not possible, she whispered. These devices are hardened against electromagnetic interference. That's when we heard the voice. Not Tom's voice this time. A woman's voice, calling from somewhere ahead of us. Help me! Please! Someone help me! We looked at each other. The smart thing would have been to leave, get back up, come back with a full team. But that voice sounded so desperate, so afraid. "Stay close to me," I told Sarah. We pushed through the undergrowth toward the sound. We found her in another clearing, similar to where I'd seen the Tom thing. A young woman, maybe 25, wearing hiking clothes. She was sitting on a fallen log, crying. "Thank God," she said when she saw us. "I've been lost for hours. My friends went ahead on the trail and I can't find them." Something was wrong. Her clothes were clean. No tears, no dirt, and she wasn't wearing a backpack or carrying water. No one hikes these trails without supplies. "What's your name?" I asked. Jenny Walsh. We're from Ohio, just here for the weekend." I pulled out my radio. Still dead. B. But I noticed something else. My watch was running backward. The hands were moving counterclockwise. "Sarah," I whispered, "we need to go. Now." But Sarah was staring at her tablet. Somehow it had come back to life, and the screen was showing impossible readings. "John, the electromagnetic field here is so intense it's actually warping time. Look at these measurements. We're experiencing temporal displacement." That's when Jenny stood up, when she smiled. It was the same smile Tom had worn in the forest, too wide, showing too many teeth. "Don't leave yet," she said. But the voice came from above us, from the trees. I looked up and saw it again. The creature, perched on a branch directly overhead, red eyes glowing in the dim light filtering through the canopy. "I've been waiting for you, John Blackwater," it said, still using Jenny's voice. Sarah screamed. The thing that looked like Jenny flickered, like a bad TV signal, then vanished completely. "Your friend Tom didn't understand," the creature said, now using its own voice, like wind through dry leaves, like branches scraping against windows. "He ran when I tried to show him what was coming. His heart couldn't handle the truth." I grabbed Sarah's arm. "We're leaving. Now." But the creature spread its wings, they had to be 15 feet across, and glided down to block our path. Up close, it was even more terrifying. The body was humanoid but covered in dark feathers that seemed to absorb light. The face was almost human, but the proportions were wrong. Eyes too large, neck too long, skin pulled too tight over sharp bones. "The bridge," it said. 13 months from today. December 15th, 1995. During the Christmas festival, when the bridge is crowded with families. Images flooded my mind. Not words or pictures, but direct knowledge somehow transferred from the creature's consciousness to mine. I saw the New River G, Orge Bridge, the steel arch that carried thousands of cars across the canyon every day. I saw hairline cracks in the support cables, metal fatigue from decades of wind and weather. I saw those cracks spreading, growing, until... The vision was so vivid I fell to my knees, clutching my head. Sarah was beside me, screaming. The creature's electromagnetic field was overloading our nervous systems, forcing us to experience a future that hadn't happened yet. In the vision, I watched the bridge collapse during peak tourist season. Cars plunging into the gorge, families screaming as they fell. Hundreds of people dead in seconds. "Why are you showing me this?" I gasped. "Because you can stop it," the creature said. "You have the knowledge, the access, the credibility. You can make them listen." "What are you?" "A guardian, a watcher. I exist in the spaces between moments, seeing all times at once. When the barriers grow thin, when disaster approaches, I manifest to warn those who might act." Sarah managed to stand up, though she was shaking. "The electromagnetic readings," she whispered. "You're not from our dimension, are you?" "I am from the spaces between dimensions," it replied. "But I am trapped here until the warning is given and received." The creature folded its wings and stepped closer, its red eyes fixed on mine. "The bridge inspection is scheduled for next spring. The inspectors will find minor corrosion, nothing requiring immediate action. They will miss the hairline fractures in the support cables because those fractures exist in a quantum state, present but not yet visible to your instruments. Then how can we... You will guide them to the right locations. You will insist on deeper testing. You will make them understand that lives depend on their thoroughness. The creature reached out with one clawed hand and touched my forehead. The world exploded into light and sound and impossible knowledge. I saw through its eyes, experienced time as it did, not as a straight line, but as a vast web, all moments existing simultaneously. I saw the bridge, Sue, collapse in perfect detail, every falling car, every scream. But I also saw other possible futures where the bridge stood, where families went home safe, where children grew up to have children of their own. When the vision ended, I was lying on the ground, blood running from my nose. Sarah was holding me, talking rapidly into her satellite phone. Apparently that still worked when conventional electronics failed. The creature was gone, but burned into my memory was everything I needed to know. The exact locations of the structural weaknesses, the specific tests that would reveal them, the bureaucratic channels I'd need to navigate to make the repairs happen. "John, stay with me," Sarah was saying. "Medevac helicopter is en route." "The bridge," I whispered. "We have to save the bridge." They kept me in the hospital for 3 days. Doctors said I'd suffered some kind of seizure, possibly triggered by electromagnetic exposure. All my tests came back normal, but they were worried about the memory issues. I kept insisting I could remember things that hadn't happened yet. Sarah visited every day. She'd experienced the same visions, though not as intensely. Her scientific mind was struggling to process what we'd encountered. "The data doesn't lie," she told me on the 3rd day. "Whatever that thing was, it generated electromagnetic fields beyond anything in our current understanding of physics. And the temporal displacement readings, John, for 17 minutes, we existed slightly outside normal time flow. Do you believe what it showed us about the bridge?" She was quiet for a long time. "I've run computer simulations based on the structural details from your vision. If those hairline fractures exist where you say they do, and if they propagate along the stress vectors you described, yes, the bridge could collapse under holiday traffic loads." The problem was convents. Singh, anyone else. Bridge inspections were scheduled annually, handled by state engineers who'd been doing this work for decades. Why would they listen to a park ranger claiming to have prophetic visions from a supernatural creature? I started with my supervisor, Ranger Captain Mike Henderson, 20-year veteran, practical man who trusted facts over feelings. "John, you've been through a traumatic experience," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Losing Tom, getting lost in the woods, some kind of medical episode. Maybe you should take more time off." "Mike, I need you to listen to me. Really listen. The new River Gorge Bridge is going to collapse on December 15th next year during the Christmas festival, unless we act now." He stared at me like I'd lost my mind, which, from his perspective, maybe I had. Based on what evidence? I couldn't tell him about the creature. So I stuck to what Sarah and I had documented. Electromagnetic anomalies in the area suggest possible structural instabilities in the bridge supports. We need to request an emergency inspection focusing on the main cables and anchor points. "John, Mike, what if I'm right? What if there's even a 1% chance I'm right? How many people cross that bridge during the Christmas festival?" That got his attention. Mike had kids, grandkids. The idea of families plunging into the gorge hit him where he lived. "I'll make some calls," he said finally. "But John, if this turns out to be some kind of breakdown, you're looking at mandatory psych leave." The state engineers agreed to an emergency inspection, scheduled for February 1995. Dr. Martinez provided the technical justification. Her electromagnetic studies suggested possible metal fatigue in the bridge structure. It wasn't the full truth, but it was enough to get official attention. Winter was hard. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat properly. Every night I dreamed of falling cars and screaming families. The visions the creature had given me were too vivid, too detailed. I knew the names of people who would die, could see their faces as Kitosaurus, literally as if I'd met them. Sarah and I returned to the gorge several times, hoping to encounter the creature again. The electromagnetic readings stayed abnormal, but we never saw those red eyes. It was like the entity was waiting, watching to see if we'd follow through on the warning. February finally came. I took vacation time to observe the bridge inspection, claiming personal interest in structural engineering. The chief inspector was a woman named Carol Stevens, 30 years of experience with bridge safety. Routine inspection shows normal wear patterns, she told her team after the first day. Some minor corrosion on the south tower, but nothing requiring immediate attention. This was exactly what the creature had predicted. The visible problems were minor. The real danger was hidden in quantum-level fractures that wouldn't show up on standard tests. That night, I cornered Carol at her hotel. "Ms. Stevens, I need to talk to you about the cable analysis. You're the park ranger, right? Blackwater? Look, I appreciate civilian interest, but this is technical work. The hairline fractures in cables 7, 12, and 18. You need to run stress analysis on those specific points." She stopped walking. "What fractures?" "Our preliminary inspection didn't show any fractures in those cables." "They're there, microscopic level, but they're there, and they're propagating along predictable stress vectors. If you don't find them now, the bridge will fail under peak load conditions." How could you possibly know that? I couldn't tell her about supernatural visions, but I could give her the technical details the creature had burned into my memory. "Run ultrasonic testing on cable 7, 47 feet from the south anchor point. Cable 12, 31 feet from the north anchor. Cable 18, 63 feet from the south anchor. Use the deep penetration protocols, not the standard surface scans." She was staring at me now. "Those are very specific measurements. Where did you get this information?" "Does it matter? If I'm wrong, you waste a few hours of testing time. If I'm right, you save hundreds of lives." The next day, Carol ordered the deep ultrasonic tests at the exact locations I'd specified. By afternoon, she was on the phone with state transportation officials, her voice tense with controlled panic. "We've got serious structural compromise in 3 main support cables. Hairline fractures, multiple stress points. The bridge needs to be closed for emergency repairs immediately." They closed the bridge that evening. Traffic was rerouted to the old steel bridge 20 miles south, causing massive delays but keeping people safe. The repairs took 8 months and cost $12 million. December 15, 1995 came and went. The Christmas festival was relocated to a park near the old bridge. Families enjoyed hot chocolate and Christmas carols instead of plunging to their deaths in a twisted wreckage of steel and cars. I saved them. We saved them. But the cost was higher than I expected. The creature came to me one more time 3 days after the bridge repairs were completed. I was alone in my apartment, trying to sleep, when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in white clouds and every electronic device in the place began flickering. It materialized slowly, like morning fog gathering into solid form. Same red eyes, same impossible wingspan, but somehow different, less threatening, more grateful. "The warning has been received," it said, its voice like wind through autumn leaves. "The future has changed. The bridge stands. The families live." "Is it over?" I asked. "For now. But the barriers remain thin in this place. I will return when next disaster approaches, and you will feel it calling." The creature stepped closer. When it touched my forehead, I felt the same explosion of temporal awareness, but gentler this time, more controlled. "You have been changed by contact with spaces between moments," it said. "You will sense coming disasters before they manifest. This is both gift and burden. I don't want it. Few do. But having received the knowledge, you cannot unknow it. Use it wisely." The creature spread its wings and simply faded, like smoke dispersing on a breeze. That was 30 years ago. I'm still a park ranger, though I've moved around the Appalachian region. Wherever electromagnetic anomalies spike, wherever the barriers between dimensions grow thin, I find myself transferred to a new position. Sometimes I think the Park Service has a file on me. The ranger who has an unusual knack for predicting structural failures and natural disasters. I've prevented 6 major catastrophes since the bridge. A dam collapse in Tennessee, a landslide in North Carolina, a gas line explosion in Kentucky. Each time, I get the same electromagnetic headaches, the same impossible visions. Each time, I find a way to make officials listen without mentioning the supernatural source of my information. Dr. Martinez stayed in touch until she passed away last year. Cancer, the doctor said, but I sometimes wonder if prolonged exposure to interdimensional entities took a toll on her cellular structure. She published several papers on electromagnetic anomalies in Appalachian geology, becoming a respected expert in the field. She never mentioned our encounter with the creature, but she always answered when I called with concerns about unusual readings. The Mothman, that's what the internet calls creatures like the one I met, still appears throughout the region. Other rangers report sightings, always followed by some preventable disaster. We've formed an unofficial network, sharing information through encrypted communications. The public doesn't need to know about the supernatural early warning system protecting them. My Cherokee grandmother was right about thin places. There are locations where the normal rules don't apply, where entities from other dimensions can cross over. Usually, they're just watching, observing. But sometimes when human lives hang in the balance, they intervene. Most people see the red eyes and run. They think it's a monster, a harbinger of death. They don't understand it's actually trying to save them. I'm retiring next month, 65 years old, arthritis in my knees, and the electromagnetic sensitivity is getting worse. Each vision leaves me bedridden for days afterward, but I've trained 3 younger rangers in what to watch for, the signs that reality is getting ready to crack. Last week, my replacement called from the New River Gorge. "John, we're getting some strange electromagnetic readings near Endless Wall Trail. The wildlife is acting weird, and hikers are reporting red lights in the sky." I drove down from my cabin in Virginia. The readings were unmistakable. Something big is coming, something that will require intervention. I'm too old now, too fragile to handle direct contact with interdimensional entities. But my replacement is young, smart, has a background in electronics like I did. When he sees those red eyes watching from the darkness, I hope he'll remember what I taught him. Don't run. Listen. The monsters we fear are often trying to save us. The Mothman is still out there, still watching, still warning. Somewhere in the mountains of Appalachia, red eyes are scanning possible futures, looking for the disasters they can help us prevent. And when you see those eyes looking back at you from the edge of the forest, don't scream. Don't flee. Pay attention to what they're trying to tell you. Your life might depend on it. My name is Rebecca Thornton, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a park ranger for 19 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me. Poachers, drug dealers, lost hikers, bears getting too close to campsites, you name it, I've dealt with it. I work in Savage River State Forest in Maryland, way up near the Pennsylvania border. It's a beautiful place, but remote, really remote. When you're deep in the Big Run area where I patrol, you can't even get cell phone service. The trees are so thick overhead that sometimes it feels like night even at noon. I used to be military police in the Army before this job. Learned how to shoot straight, how to read people, how to handle trouble. My dad taught me to hunt when I was little, back in the Pennsylvania mountains. So when I became a ranger, tracking poachers felt natural. They think they're smart, but they all make the same mistakes, leave the same kinds of signs. That September in 1989 was colder than usual. Frost came early and killed a lot of the plants. The leaves started turning brown before they should have. Even the animals seemed nervous. My tracking dog, Rex, kept whining for no reason I could see. The first call came in on a Tuesday morning. Farmer named Joe Murphy called the office, said something had killed 3 of his cows. Not just killed them, tore them apart. Joe's farm sits right on the edge of the forest, been there for 40 years. He knows the difference between a bear attack and something else. "Whatever did this wasn't natural, Becca," Joe told me when I drove out to look. His face was pale, hands shaking as he pointed toward the pasture. "I've seen bears kill cattle before. This was different." He was right. When I saw those cows, my stomach dropped. They weren't just dead. They were arranged, lined up like someone had placed them there on purpose. The bite marks were huge, bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. And the way their bones were crushed, it would take incredible strength. But what bothered me most was the silence. Usually when there's a kill site, you get flies, crows, other scavengers. Nothing touched these cows. Even the flies stayed away. I took pictures, made notes, collected what evidence I could. Standard procedure. Rex wouldn't go near the carcasses. He's a German shepherd, trained for tracking, brave as they come. But he cowered behind my truck the whole time. Probably just a really big bear, I told Joe, but I didn't believe it myself. I'll set up some trail cameras, see what we're dealing with. That night I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about those cows, about the way they were arranged, about Rex's behavior. In 19 years of ranger work, I'd never seen anything like it. I called my supervisor the next morning. "Tom, I need backup on this cattle kill. Something's not right." "What do you mean, not right?" "I mean the bite patterns don't match any predator in our area, and the cows were positioned, like something intelligent did it." Tom laughed. "Becca, you're starting to sound like one of those Bigfoot hunters. It's a bear. Set some traps, put up warning signs, write your report." But I knew it wasn't a bear. I just didn't know what it was. I went back to Joe's farm the next day to set up trail cameras. The smell hit me before I even got out of my truck. Something rotten and wild, like wet fur and old blood. Rex refused to get out at all this time. The cameras went up easy enough, though my hands kept shaking for some reason. I told myself it was just the cold. September in Maryland shouldn't be this cold. Walking back to my truck, I found the first track. It was in the mud near the fence line, clear as day. At first glance, it looked like a wolf print, but wolves haven't been in Maryland for over 100 years. And this print was massive, 18 inches long, with claw marks that dug deep into the earth. But here's what made my blood run cold. Halfway through the print, it changed. The back half looked like a wolf paw. The front half looked almost human, like fingers instead of toes. I stared at that print for 10 minutes, trying to make sense of it. Animals don't have hands and paws at the same time. It's impossible. I took pictures from every angle, made a plaster cast, standard evidence collection. But my hands were shaking so bad I nearly dropped the camera. The cameras didn't help. When I checked them 3 days later, all I had was static. 12 hours of white noise and electrical interference. But the motion sensors had triggered. Something had been there. Something big enough to set off cameras mounted 8 feet off the ground. That's when I found the second livestock kill. This time, it was at the Hendricks place, 5 miles from Joe's farm. 4 sheep, arranged in a perfect line. Same massive bite marks, same crushing damage to the bones. But this time, there were claw marks on the trees around the kill site. Deep gouges in the oak bark starting about 8 feet up and running in parallel lines down to the ground. Like something had been sharpening its claws. Mrs. Hendricks was too scared to come outside while I worked. She watched from her kitchen window, occasionally peeking through the curtains. "My dogs won't stop howling at night," she told me through the screen door. "Haven't eaten in 2 days. Just hide under the porch and shake." I found more tracks around the sheep. These were different, deeper, showing more weight. And they told a story that made no sense. The creature had walked in on 4 legs, killed the sheep, then arranged them on 2 legs. The stride length changed right in the middle of the tracks. No animal changes from quadruped to biped. It doesn't happen. I called the state police that evening. "I need a wildlife expert to look at some evidence. Something's killing livestock in a pattern I can't identify." Detective Martinez came out the next morning. Good cop, worked with me on poaching cases before. But when I showed him the tracks, the photos, the claw marks on the trees, his face went white. "Becca, what the hell are we dealing with here?" "I don't know, but it's smart, it's territorial, and it's getting bolder." We found the third kill site that afternoon. This time it wasn't livestock. 2 poachers had been working the area, probably hunting deer out of season. We found their camp first. Expensive equipment scattered everywhere, high-powered rifles snapped in half like twigs. Their truck had been flipped over. We found the bodies 50 yards away. I've seen a lot of death in my time, military and civilian, but this was different. These men had been killed by something with incredible strength and intelligence. Their skulls were crushed, but their bodies were positioned carefully, deliberately, like a warning. Martinez threw up behind a tree. I don't blame him. But what got to me wasn't just the bodies. It was the tracks around them. The same changing prints, paw to hand, 4 legs to 2. And scratched into the dirt beside each body was the same symbol, 3 parallel lines with a circle around them. No animal makes symbols. That night I sat in my cabin with Rex and tried to make sense of what I'd seen. 3 kill sites, escalating violence, impossible tracks, symbolic markings. Rex kept growling at the windows, fur standing up on his neck. He could smell something I couldn't. Something was out there in the darkness, watching, waiting. And I had the terrible feeling it was watching me. The FBI showed up 2 days later. Detective Martinez had called them about the poacher murders, and apparently killing people gets more attention than killing cows. Agent Sarah Chen introduced herself as a behavioral analyst, but she brought someone else with her, Dr. Marbars Webb, who she called a wildlife consultant. I'd never heard of a wildlife consultant working with the FBI before. Ranger Thornton, Agent Chen said as we stood at the second murder site, we've reviewed your evidence, the positioning of the bodies, the symbolic markings. This shows intelligence and planning. So, you don't think it's an animal? I said. Dr. Webb knelt beside the claw marks on a nearby tree, running his fingers along the gouges. The depth and spacing of these marks don't match any known North American predator. The force required to make cuts this deep. We're talking about something with the strength of a grizzly bear, but the intelligence of a human. Are you telling me we're dealing with some kind of trained animal? Like a circus act gone wrong? Agent Chen and Dr. Webb exchanged a look. We're telling you to keep an open mind, Chen said. There have been similar cases in other remote forest areas. Montana, Northern California. Always the same pattern, livestock kills, then human victims, always arranged with ritualistic precision. That night I decided to do what rangers do, patrol my territory. If something was hunting in my forest, I needed to understand what it was and how it moved. I set out before dawn with Rex, following the creek that runs through Big Run. The morning was cold and misty, with that early frost making everything look sharp and brittle. Rex stayed close to my heels, whimpering occasionally. About 2 miles in, we found something new. Trees had been pushed over, not blown down by wind, but pushed over by something incredibly strong. They formed a rough circle about 30 feet across, like a natural amphitheater. In the center of the circle was a pile of bones, not just cow and sheep bones, deer, rabbits, raccoons, months' worth of kills, all cleaned white and stacked neatly. Rex started barking frantically. Not his warning bark, his fear bark. The sound echoed off the trees and died in the mist. That's when I heard it answer. The howl came from somewhere above us, in the trees, but it wasn't on. E-voice. It was like a harmony, multiple tones blending together from a single throat. No wolf can do that. No animal can do that. The sound filled the forest, bouncing off trees and rocks until I couldn't tell where it was coming from. Rex pressed against my legs, trembling. I drew my service weapon and looked up into the canopy. The trees were thick with mist, but I could see shapes moving up there. Dark forms leaping from branch to branch, too quick to focus on. "Federal agent," I yelled, trying to keep my voice steady. "Identify yourself." The movement stopped. The forest went completely silent. Then I saw the eyes, yellow eyes, reflecting the dim morning light, staring down at me from maybe 40 feet up. Not the eyes of any animal I knew, too intelligent, too focused. They studied me like I was some kind of puzzle to solve. "Easy, Rex," I whispered. My dog had stopped barking and was now frozen in place, staring up at those eyes. The eyes blinked once, slowly, deliberately. Then they were gone. I radioed for backup, but it took Chen and Webb 3 hours to reach us. By then, whatever had been watching us was long gone, but the evidence was still there. The circle of pushed-over trees, the bone pile, and something new. Scratched into the bark of the largest fallen tree were symbols. Not just the 3 lines and circle I'd seen at the murder sites. Dozens of symbols covering 20 feet of bark. They looked almost like writing. Dr. Webb spent an hour photographing them, his face getting paler with each shot. "Have you seen markings like this before?" I asked. "Similar ones," he said quietly. "In Montana, California. Different locations, but the same language, I guess you'd call it." "Language?" He looked at me seriously. "Ranger Thornton, what if I told you that every one of these cases involved an entity that seems to be protecting its territory from human, as it perceives as threats? Always in old-growth forests. Always in areas where the ecosystem is pristine." "I'd say you sound like you believe in monsters." "I believe in things science hasn't explained yet. And right now, science can't explain how something is killing people and leaving behind evidence that suggests intelligence equal to or greater than human." That evening, we set up a command post at my ranger station. Chen wanted to coordinate a larger search, bring in more agents. But I knew the forest better than anyone, and I had a feeling that whatever was out there wouldn't show itself to a crowd. I volunteered to do a night patrol alone. "Absolutely not," Chen said. "We don't split up when we're dealing with an unknown entity that's already killed 2 people. But I'm a ranger. These woods are my responsibility. If something was living in my forest, killing people in my territory, I needed to face it." At 2 a.m., I slipped out of the command post with Rex. The night was clear and cold, with a full moon casting everything in silver light, perfect for tracking. We followed the creek deeper into Big Run, past the Bone Circle, into territory I rarely patrolled. Old-growth forest, trees so thick they blocked out most of the moonlight. Rex stopped suddenly, hackles raised. He looked ahead into the darkness and made a sound I'd never heard from him before. Part whine, part growl, all terror. 50 feet ahead, standing in a shaft of moonlight, was the thing I'd been tracking. It was 7 feet tall, covered in dark fur, walking upright on 2 legs like a man. But its head was wrong, elongated, with a wolf's snout and those same yellow eyes I'd seen earlier. Its arms were too long, ending in hands that were part human, part claw. It stood perfectly still, watching me. Waiting. I raised my gun, but my hands were shaking so bad I couldn't aim properly. The creature tilted its head, studying me. Then it did something that made my blood freeze. It smiled. Not a human smile, not an animal expression. Something in between, showing teeth too sharp and too ma's. Any. Then it spoke. Not words. Not sounds any human throat could make. But I understood anyway, like the meaning was placed directly into my mind. Guardian, protector, same. It knew what I was. And somehow, I knew what it was. Rex whimpered and pressed against my legs. The creature looked down at my dog, then back at me. Its expression changed. Less threatening, more curious. "Why do you hunt the hunters?" The question formed in my mind without sound. I found myself answering without speaking. Because they hurt things that can't protect themselves. The creature nodded slowly. Then it raised one clawed hand and pointed deeper into the forest. "Come. See. Understand." Against every instinct screaming in my head, I followed the creature deeper into the forest. Rex stayed pressed against my side, whimpering but not running. Maybe he sensed something I was still trying to understand. The creature moved through the trees like it belonged there, never breaking a branch or disturbing the forest floor. It would pause occasionally to look back at me, making sure I was following. After maybe half a mile, we reached a place I'd never seen before, a natural clearing where the creek formed a small waterfall. The moonlight was bright here, turning the water silver. The creature stood at the edge of the clearing and gestured with one clawed hand. The forest around us came alive. Wolves emerged from the shadows. Real wolves, a whole pack of them, moving silently into the clearing. They showed no fear of the creature. If anything, they seemed to defer to it, lowering their heads as they passed. Behind the wolves came other animals, deer, bears, even a mountain lion I didn't know existed in these woods. All of them moved with purpose, like they were answering some kind of summons. The creature looked at me, and again I heard its voice in my mind. This is why. Images flooded, my thoughts. Not words, but pictures and emotions. I saw the forest as it had been decades ago, pristine, untouched, full of life. I saw the logging operations of the 1920s, men with saws, and trucks tearing down trees that had stood for centuries. I saw the first guardian, protecting what it could. I saw poachers and developers, hunters who killed for sport instead of need, people who saw the forest as something to conquer instead of respect. And I saw what happened to them. The forest chooses its guardians. The creature's voice whispered in my mind. Human and other. Those who protect, we protect. Those who destroy. The images changed. I saw the two poachers from yesterday, but not their bodies. I saw them alive, setting illegal snares, poisoning a creek to kill fish for sport, leaving wounded animals to suffer. I saw them killing a wolf pup just for fun. Justice, the creature said simply. You're protecting the forest, I said out loud. My voice sounded strange in the silence. The creature nodded. Then it did something that shocked me more than anything else that night. It began to change. The transformation was fluid, like watching water flow. The wolf features softened, became more human. The fur receded, revealing dark skin. The claws shortened into fingers. Within moments, a man stood before me, tall, dark-haired, wearing simple clothes that seemed to be made from animal hide. I can take many forms, he said in a normal human voice, but this is easier for talking. Rex stopped whimpering and actually took a step forward, tail wagging cautiously. You're human? I was once, long ago. The forest called to me, as it calls to all its guardians. Some answer by becoming rangers, forest service, people who protect with human laws. Others, he gestured to himself. Others become something more. The logging accidents in the 1920s, that was you? My predecessor. Each generation, the forest chooses someone new, someone who loves it enough to become part of it. I felt something shift inside me, like a door opening in my mind. You're off, airing me a choice. The FBI agents will bring more people. Scientists, hunters, people who want to capture and study what they don't understand. They'll turn this place into a laboratory, drive out the animals, cut down trees to build facilities. I could see it happening. The quiet, ancient peace of Big Run destroyed by curiosity and fear. But there's another way, the Guardian continued. You know these woods. You already protect them. You could do more. Become like you. Become what the forest needs you to be. The pack of wolves had formed a circle around us. They watched silently, like they understood what was being offered. What about the people? Agent Chen, Dr. Webb? They're just doing their jobs. Are they? He gestured, and the air shimmered. Suddenly we could see the command post at my ranger station, but not as I'd left it. There were more vehicles now, more people. I could see Chen on a radio calling for backup. They're bringing a full team, the Guardian said. Tranquilizer guns, nets, tracking equipment. They want to capture me, study me, put me in a cage. In the vision, I could see Dr. Webb setting up some kind of electronic device, not just for studying, for hunting. And when they're done studying me, the Guardian continued, they'll want to find others. Turn the search into a career, write books, make documentaries, bring tourists. I thought about what that would mean for Big Run. Tour buses, cameras, people wanting to see the monster. The quiet, sacred places trampled by crowds. I won't let that happen, I said. The Guardian smiled, his human smile this time, warm and sad. I know. That's why the forest chose you. Behind us, a twig snapped. We turned to see Agent Chen and Dr. Webb emerging from the tree line, both carrying tranquilizer rifles. Step away from it, Ranger Thornton, Chen shouted. That thing is extremely dangerous. Rex started barking, but not at the Guardian, at the federal agents. The Guardian looked at me one last time. Choose quickly, Becca. Guardian to Guardian. Chen raised her rifle. It's Some kind of hybrid, Thornton. Probably escaped from a lab somewhere. We need it alive for study. In that moment, I understood everything. The forest, the guardian. My role in protecting something sacred from people who saw it only as a specimen to catalog. I stepped between Chen and the guardian, my service weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. Agent Chen, lower your weapon. Thornton, get out of the way. That thing killed 2 people. 2 poachers who were torturing animals for sport. The forest was defending itself. Dr. Webb circled around to get a better angle. Ranger, you don't understand what you're dealing with. This entity could be incredibly valuable to science. The guardian touched my shoulder gently. When I looked back at him, he was changing again, taking his wolf form. But this time, instead of 7 feet of dangerous predator, I saw him for what he really was. A protector, like me. I understand perfectly, I told Webb, and I know whose side I'm on. What happened next lasted only seconds, but I remember every detail. Agent Chen fired her tranquilizer gun. The dart flew toward the guardian, but he was already moving, shifting from human to wolf form mid-leap. The dart passed harmlessly through the space where he'd been standing. Dr. Webb tried to circle around for a better shot, but Rex had other ideas. My dog tackled the wildlife consultant, sending both of them tumbling into the creek. The guardian landed behind Chen and grabbed her rifle, crushing it in his claws like it was made of paper. She reached for her sidearm, but he simply roared, that impossible multi-toned howl that filled the entire forest. Chen froze. Webb stopped thrashing in the creek. Even I felt the power in that sound, the voice of the wilderness itself. But the guardian didn't hurt them. Instead, he looked at me and spoke, his words somehow reaching all of us. They will leave. They will forget. The forest will be protected. I don't know how he did it, but suddenly Chen and Webb looked confused, lost. They stumbled around the clearing like people waking from a dream. Where are we? Chen asked, looking around with unfocused eyes. The search, Webb mumbled. We were searching for something. You were investigating some bear attacks, I said firmly. But the bear moved on. Case closed. They nodded, though they still seemed confused. Within an hour, they'd packed up their equipment and left. Their memories somehow changed to remember a routine investigation that found nothing unusual. But I remembered everything. The guardian and I spent the rest of that night talking. He told me about the forest's history, about the network of guardians in other wild places, about the balance between human needs and nature's rights. You don't have to become what I am, he said as dawn approached. But you'll be different now, more connected to this place, more able to sense threats to it. He was right. Over the following weeks, I found that I could feel the forest's moods, sense when poachers entered the territory, communicate with animals in ways I'd never been able to before. Rex and I became a more effective team than ever. The poaching incident stopped completely. Word somehow spread among the hunters that Big Run was protected by something they didn't want to meet. The few who tested that warning found their equipment destroyed, their vehicles disabled, and themselves deposited at the forest entrance with clear memories of why they should never return. But the legitimate users, hikers, campers, researchers who respected the wilderness, found Big Run more welcoming than ever. Animals showed themselves more freely. The forest seemed healthier, more alive. I still see the guardian sometimes, usually at dawn or dusk when the light in. Tea is soft, and the boundary between human and wild feels thinner. He appears as a man, a wolf, or something in between, depending on his mood and the message he wants to send. The forest. Service eventually redesignated parts of Big Run as a protected wilderness area, citing sensitive ecosystem recovery and enhanced wildlife activity. They don't know about the guardian, but they can feel the change in the forest's health. Tourists sometimes ask me about the Bigfoot sightings they've heard rumors of. I tell them the same thing I tell everyone. Respect the wilderness, and it might show you wonders. Abuse it, and face consequences no human law can protect you from. Rex is old now, but he still patrols with me. He's never forgotten that night in the clearing, and sometimes I catch him staring into the forest with an expression that says he knows exactly who's watching back. Last month, a developer approached me about a logging contract for the old growth area near the waterfall. I smiled and told him I'd pass along his proposal to the appropriate authority. That night, his surveying equipment was found arranged in a perfect circle, crushed flat. The 3 parallel lines and circle symbol was carved into a nearby tree. He decided to look for timber rights somewhere else. The forest has its guardians, human and otherwise, and some threats require more than badges and paperwork to handle. But mostly, Big Run is peaceful now. The way it's supposed to be. The way it will stay, as long as people like me are willing to stand between the sacred and those who would destroy it. Some nights, when I'm sitting on my cabin porch with Rex beside me, I hear that impossible howl echoing through the trees. Not threatening this time, but welcoming. The sound of a forest that knows it's protected. The sound of home. My name is Sam Hatfield, and I've been a park ranger for 22 years. I know what you're thinking when you hear my last name. Yes, I'm one of those Hatfields. My great-great-grandfather rode with devil ants during the feud. Growing up, I heard all the stories about the killing and the hate that went on for decades in these mountains, but I always figured they were just stories. I work the Hatfield-McCoy Trail System on the West Virginia-Kentucky border. It's beautiful country, thick forests, deep valleys, and old mountains that have seen more history than most places on Earth. I started as a fire lookout when I was 24 and worked my way up through every department. Now I specialize in what we call cultural resource management. Basically, I help preserve the history of these mountains and teach people about what happened here. The area I patrol is called Bear Wallow, a series of narrow valleys and hollers that wind between steep ridges. Most folks avoid it. There are abandoned coal mines up there, old homesteads falling down, and graves that haven't been tended in 100 years. The locals still remember the feud, and trust doesn't come easy in these parts. April 1991 was when it all started. We had this fog roll in that just wouldn't lift, day after day, thick as cotton, hanging in the valleys like it was glued there. You couldn't see 10 feet in front of you most days. Weather Service said it was unusual, but not impossible. I figured it would blow through like everything else. Then the hikers started reporting strange things. First was a family from Ohio who came to walk the historical trail. They made it about 3 miles in before they turned around. The father came to my station shaking his head, said they saw people watching them from the old cabin ruins. When I asked him to describe these people, he got real quiet. They didn't have eyes, he said. Just hollow places where eyes should be. His wife nodded, like someone had scooped them out with a spoon. I told them it was probably just the fog playing tricks. Maybe some tree stumps that looked like people in the poor visibility. They didn't seem convinced, but they thanked me and left. 2 days later, a Civil War reenactment group that comes through every spring called to cancel. The leader, a man named Jim Morrison, who I'd worked with for 5 years, sounded embarrassed on the phone. Sam, I know this sounds crazy, but my boys won't camp up there. They're saying the place feels wrong, like something's watching them all the time. These were grown men who spent weekends pretending to fight battles. They weren't easily spooked. What exactly did they see? I asked. Figures in the trees, standing too still to be alive. And Sam, he paused. They said these figures looked like they were from the feud days. Old clothes, old rifles, but their faces... Let me guess. No eyes. That's right. How'd you know? I looked out my window at the fog hanging in the valley like a gray blanket. Lucky guess. That night, I sat in my cabin going through the historical records. The Hatfield-McCoy feud ran from roughly 1863 to 1891. 30 years of killing and revenge. The most violent period was right here in Bear Wallow, where my ancestor Devil Ants had his stronghold. Dozens of people died in these mountains. Many of the bodies were never found. My grandmother used to tell me stories about the hollow-eyed dead when I was little. She said they were the spirits of people who died with so much hate in their hearts that it burned out their eyes. They couldn't rest, couldn't move on, because the anger kept them tied to the earth. I always thought it was just a way to scare kids into behaving, but sitting there in my cabin with the fog pressing against the windows like as something trying to get in, those old stories didn't seem so silly anymore. I made a decision that night. Come morning, fog or no fog, I was going up to Bear Wallow to see what was really going on. The fog was so thick the next morning I had to use my compass just to find the trail. Everything was muffled and strange. Even my footsteps sounded wrong, like they were echoing off invisible walls. But I've hiked these mountains in all kinds of weather, and I wasn't about to let a little fog stop me from doing my job. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Just my breathing and the soft crunch of leaves under my boots. In 22 years of ranging, I'd never heard the mountains this quiet. About a mile up the trail, I found the first sign that something was off. Footprints. They were in a patch of soft mud beside Grapevine Creek, clear as day despite the fog. But these weren't modern hiking boots or sneakers. They were bare feet, long and narrow, with distinct toe prints. What made them strange was that it had been freezing the past 3 nights. Who walks barefoot in weather cold enough to kill you? I knelt down for a closer look and felt my stomach drop. The prints were heading toward the ruins of the old Hatfield cabin, the one where Devil Anse was born. But more importantly, they were fresh. The mud was still soft around the edges. I followed the prints through the fog, moving slow and quiet like I was tracking a wounded animal. The trail led me up the ridge and through a stand of old-growth oak trees that had probably been here during the feud. Spanish moss hung from the branches like torn curtains, and everything dripped with moisture from the fog. That's when I saw the cabin. It had been falling down for decades. Roof caved in, walls tumbling, more like a pile of old logs than a building. But something was different. There were clothes hanging on a rope strung between 2 trees beside the ruins. Old-fashioned clothes, a long dress, men's work pants, a cotton shirt. The clothes we re-clean. They looked brand new. I walked closer, my hand resting on the radio clipped to my belt, though I knew it wouldn't work in this fog. The mountains created dead zones on a good day, and the weather made it worse. The clothes swayed slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. As I got closer, I could see details that made my skin crawl. There were holes in the shirt, small, round holes with dark stains around the edges. Bullet holes. And the stains looked like blood. Fresh blood. A stick snapped behind me. I spun around, hand going to the pistol on my hip. "Hello? Anyone there?" The fog swallowed my voice. But I could feel something watching me. That prickly sensation between your shoulder blades when you know eyes are on you. "This is Park Service property," I called out. "If someone's there, you need to identify yourself." No answer, just that terrible silence. I backed toward the trail, keeping my eyes on the tree line. That's when I saw it, a shape standing between 2 pine trees about 30 yards away. Tall, wearing what looked like old-fashioned clothes. It stood perfectly still, like a statue. "Sir? Ma'am? I need you to come out where I can see you." The figure didn't move. Didn't even seem to be breathing. I took a step closer, and the fog shifted just enough for me to see the face. It was smooth. No features at all where the eyes should have been. Just empty, hollow spaces like someone had carved them out with a knife. The mouth was moving, working up and down, but no sound came out. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a fallen log. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my notebook and wrote down everything I'd seen. The footprints, the clothes, the figure in the trees. As a ranger, I'm trained to observe and document, even when what I'm observing doesn't make sense. I spent another hour searching the area, but found nothing else. The fog seemed to be getting thicker, and I was starting to lose the trail. I marked the GPS coordinates of the cabin ruins and headed back to my station. That evening, I called Dr. Sarah Chen, a paranormal researcher from the University of Kentucky, who'd helped me with some historical preservation projects. Sarah was smart, practical, and never laughed at things she couldn't explain. "Sam, you sound rattled. she said after I told her what happened. "I've been in these mountains my whole life, Sarah. I know every sound, every shadow. This was different. Can you get me up there? I'd like to see this for myself. The fog's too thick right now, but if it clears, call me the moment it does. And Sam, don't go back up there alone." After I hung up, I pulled out my family genealogy charts. My great-great-grandfather, John C. Hatfield, had lived in that cabin. He was Devil Anse's son, known for his temper and his way with a rifle. He'd killed 3 McCoys during the feud before dying himself in an ambush in 1888. Looking at his picture, a daguerreotype from 1885, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. The figure I'd seen in the fog had been tall and lean, just like John's. And he'd been wearing clothes that could have been from the 1880s. I tried to sleep that night, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smooth face with the hollow spaces where eyes should have been. When I finally did drift off, I dreamed of gunshots echoing through the mountains and voices screaming for revenge that would never come. The fog lifted on the 3rd day, but the feeling of wrongness only got stronger. Sarah Chen arrived that morning with her research partner, Dr. Marcus Webb, a genealogist who specialized in Appalachian family histories. Marcus was a McCoy descendant, something I didn't learn until we were already on the trail. "Your family and mine have quite a history," he said with a nervous laugh as we hiked toward Bear Wallow. "That's all in the past," I told him. "Besides, I never had anything against McCoys." But I noticed I was walking a little faster, putting distance between us without really meaning to. Something about being near a McCoy made my skin crawl, and I couldn't shake the feeling. The cabin ruins looked different in the clear morning light. The clothes were still hanging there, but now I could see they were rotting at the edges, falling apart like they'd been hanging there for decades. Sarah took photographs while Marcus examined the ground around the cabin. "These footprints are interesting," Marcus said, kneeling beside the same tracks I'd found. "The arch is too high for a modern foot. People wore different shoes in the 1800s, walked differently." Sarah looked up from her camera. "You think these are period authentic prints?" "Either that, or someone's gone to a lot of trouble to fake them." That's when we heard the gunshot. It cracked through the morning air like a whip, echoing off the ridge walls. We all froze, listening. In the distance I could hear voices, angry, shouting voices that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Hunting season doesn't start for 6 months," I said, reaching for my radio. The voices got louder. I could make out words now. Murderer, revenge, blood for blood. They seemed to be coming from the direction of Grapevine Creek. "We need to investigate," I said. "Could be poachers." Sarah grabbed my arm. "Sam, listen to those voices. Really listen." I stopped and focused. The voices were angry, full of hate, but there was something wrong with them. They echoed strangely, like they were coming from inside a cave. And underneath the words, I could hear something else. A sound like wind through empty spaces. Marcus had gone pale. "Those voices, they sound like the recordings from the Historical Society, the old-timers who remembered the feud." Another gunshot, closer this time, then screaming. We followed the sound down toward the creek, oving carefully through the underbrush. The morning was bright and clear, but as we got closer to the water, the air started to feel thick and heavy, like a storm was coming. That's when we saw them. There were 5 figures standing on the opposite bank of Grapevine Creek. They wore clothes from the 1880s, long coats, work pants, wide-brimmed hats. Each one carried a rifle, and each one had that same smooth, featureless face with hollow spaces where their eyes should have been. They were looking directly at us. "Nobody move," I whispered. "Don't make any sudden motions." One of the figures raised its rifle and pointed it at Marcus. I heard the hammer cock back with a sharp click. Marcus stumbled backward. "They know," he said, his voice shaking. "They know I'm a McCoy." The figure pulled the trigger. The gunshot was impossibly loud, like thunder right next to your ear. Marcus screamed and fell to the ground, clutching his shoulder. But when I looked, there was no blood. No wound. He was holding his shoulder like he'd been shot, but there was nothing there. It's not real, Sarah said. It's not physically real. But Marcus was writhing on the ground in obvious pain. Real or not, he was hurting. The figures started walking toward us, stepping right through the creek like the water wasn't there. Their movements were wrong, too fluid, like they were floating instead of walking. "Run," I said. We grabbed Marcus under the arms and hauled him to his feet. He could barely walk, still clutching his shoulder, but we managed to get him moving. Behind us, I could hear the hollow-eyed figures coming through the brush, branches snapping, leaves rustling, but no footsteps. We made it back to the trail and kept going until we reached my truck. Marcus collapsed in the back seat, sweating and shaking. "The pain's real," Sarah said, checking his shoulder. "There's no wound, but he's experiencing real trauma." "How is that possible?" "I don't know. But whatever those things are, they have power. They can affect the living." On the drive back to my station, Marcus started, but talking in a voice that didn't sound like his own. It was older, rougher, with a mountain accent he didn't usually have. "You Hatfield scum killed my boy," he said, glaring at me with eyes that seemed to have no life in them. "Shot him down like a dog. Now it's your turn to bleed." Sarah grabbed his face, forced him to look at her. "Marcus, you're not back there. You're here in 2991. The feud is over." He blinked several times, and the strange look faded from his eyes. "What happened? Why does my shoulder hurt so much?" "You were shot," Sarah said gently, "but not really shot. It's complicated." That night, while Marcus rested at the local hospital, Sarah and I went through the historical records. What we found made everything worse. The final battle of the Hatfield-McCoy feud had taken place right where we'd encountered the hollow-eyed figures. 8 men had died beside Grapevine Creek, 5 Hatfields and 3 McCoys. According to the records, they'd shot each other down in a fury of revenge and hate. None of them survived. But what really chilled me was a note in my great-great-grandfather's diary, written just days before his death. "The hate has burned so deep in all of us that I fear it's burned away our very souls. When we die, there'll be nothing left but the anger. We'll never rest, never find peace, as long as there's McCoy blood to spill or Hatfield blood to pay for what we done." The hollow-eyed figures weren't just spirits. They were what was left of men who'd let hatred consume them so completely that it had burned away everything human about them. They were rage and vengeance given form, trapped in an eternal cycle of violence, and they weren't finished with their war. The next morning I found my truck tires slashed and a message carved into the hood with something sharp. "The debt comes due." Sarah called to tell me Marcus was missing from the hospital. The nurses said he'd walked out during the night shift, still wearing his hospital gown. They'd found it later, abandoned by the creek where we'd encountered the hollow-eyed figures. I drove out there alone, against every instinct I had. The morning was clear and cold, with frost still on the grass. But as I got closer to Grapevine Creek, the air grew thick and heavy, and I started seeing things that couldn't be there. Smoke rising from chimneys of houses that had burned down 100 years ago. Horses tied to trees that were just saplings in the 1880s. Children playing in yards that were now overgrown with kudzu. The past was bleeding through. I found Marcus standing in the creek, water up to his waist, staring at something I couldn't see. His eyes had that empty look again, and when he spoke, it was in that old mountain voice. "Been waiting for you, Johns," he said. "Time to finish what we started." "Marcus, it's me, Sam. You know me." He turned, and for a moment I saw his real self underneath the possession. "Sam, you have to stop them. They're using me to get to you. They want to restart the feud, keep the killing going forever." Then his face changed again, became hard and cruel. "Your great-grandfather murdered my boy, shot him in the back while he was running away. Coward's way to kill." "That was over 100 years ago," I said, wading into the creek toward him. We don't have to keep paying for what our ancestors did. Blood calls for blood, Marcus said in that voice that wasn't his. Always has. Always will. He pulled out a knife, an old hunting knife with a bone handle that looked like it had been made in the 1800s. I had no idea where he'd gotten it. Marcus, fight it. You're stronger than they are. For a moment, his real voice came through. I can't. They're in my head, showing me things. Terrible things. Sam, my family. They killed so many of yours. I can feel their guilt, their shame. It's eating me alive. The hollow-eyed figures started materializing around us. First as shadows in the water, then as solid shot. Apes standing on the banks, 5 on one side, 3 on the other. The same ones who'd died here in 1888, still fighting their war. Look at them, Sam, Sarah's voice called from somewhere behind me. I turned and saw her standing on the bank holding an old photograph. Really look at them. I studied the faces, or the places where faces should have been. The hollow spaces weren't empty. They were full of something dark and writhing, like smoke made of pure hatred. They're not my ancestors, I realized. They're not Marcus's family either. They're what's left when you let hate burn away everything human about you. The figure that had been my great-great-grandfather stepped forward. When it spoke, its voice came from that hollow space where its mouth should be. You carry our blood, boy, our anger, our need for revenge. You feel it, don't you? The rage when you look at that McCoy. I did feel it. Standing there looking at Marcus, I felt a deep, burning anger that had nothing to do with anything he'd done. It was old anger, inherited anger, passed down through generations like a curse. Yes, I said, I feel it. Then take the knife, finish what we started, end the McCoy line forever. Marcus held out the knife, his hand shaking. His eyes were pleading with me to take it, to end his suffering. I understand now, I said, reaching for the knife. I understand what you are. But instead of taking the blade, I grabbed Marcus's wrist and pulled him toward me. You're not my ancestors, I said to the hollow-eyed figures. You're what my ancestors became when they chose hate over humanity. You're the worst parts of them, the parts that should have died with their bodies. The figures started moving toward us, raising their rifles. Marcus, I said, shaking him hard, remember who you are. Remember your real family, your wife, your daughter. They're waiting for you. Sarah. His own voice, weak but real. That's right, Sarah's waiting. The living Sarah, not these ghosts. The spell broke. Marcus dropped the knife and collapsed against me, and I dragged him toward the bank as the hollow-eyed figures let out a sound like wind through a graveyard. Sarah helped pull him out of the water. We need to get out of here, now. But the figures were all around us, blocking every path. They raised their rifles, and I could hear the hammers clicking back. Wait, I said, standing up slowly. I'm the last Hatfield in these mountains. You want to end this? Then end it with me. Let the McCoy go. The figures lowered their weapons slightly. But first, you need to know something. The feud didn't end because one side won. It ended because people got tired of dying. Tired of losing their children and their fathers and their brothers to stupid pride. I pulled out a piece of paper I'd brought with me, a petition signed by every Hatfield and McCoy descendant in the area, something Sarah and I had organized years ago for a peace memorial. This is what your descendants chose, I said. Peace, forgiveness, an end to the killing. The hollow-eyed figures started to flicker, like bad television reception. You're not my ancestors anymore. You're just hate without purpose, anger without meaning. You've forgotten everything that made you human. One by one, they began to fade. But the one that had been John C. Hatfield remained, its hollow face fixed on me. The blood remembers, it said in a voice like wind through dead leaves. Maybe, I said, but the heart can choose to forget. It raised its rifle one last time, aimed directly at my chest. For a moment, I thought it was going to shoot. Then it slowly lowered the weapon and looked down at its hands. Tired, it said in a voice that sounded more human than it had before. so tired of the anger. Then let it go, I said gently. Let it all go. The figure looked up at me, and for just a moment I saw something in those hollow spaces. Not eyes, but something like peace. Then it faded away like morning mist, taking the sound of gunshots and angry voices with it. The creek was just a creek again. The forest was just a forest. And Marcus was just Marcus, shivering in my arms and asking what happened. Marcus doesn't remember much about being possessed, which is probably a blessing. He went back to Kentucky and took a teaching position at a small college, but he sends me Christmas cards every year. We've never talked about what happened at Grapevine Creek, but sometimes his cards include news about McCoy family reunions and heritage festivals. I think he understands what we accomplished up there. Sarah wrote a paper about the incident for the Journal of Paranormal Research. She called it Generational Trauma and Spiritual Manifestation in Post-Conflict Environments. Most people who read it think it's fiction. The Park Service established the Hatfield-McCoy Reconciliation Memorial at Grapevine Creek the following year. It's a simple stone marker with the names of all the people who died during the feud, both families together. The inscription reads, "In memory of those who died and in hope for those who choose to live in peace." I still patrol Bear Wallow, and I still see things sometimes. Glimpses of movement in the trees, shadows that don't match any living thing. But they're different now, not angry, just present, like echoes of the past that have learned to live with the present. 3 months after the incident, I got a call from a woman named Janet Morrison in Tennessee. Her family had been feuding with their neighbors for 30 years over a property line dispute. Recently, people had started reporting strange sightings around the contested land, figures that watched from the woods, voices arguing in the night. "I heard you dealt with something similar," she said. "My grandmother says the hate in families can outlive the people carrying it. Says it's she who shats, and gets so strong it takes on a life of its own." I drove down to Tennessee that weekend. The work isn't easy, and it doesn't always end well. Hatred runs deep in these mountains, passed down, through generations like heirloom jewelry or family recipes. Sometimes it's too strong, too embedded in people's sense of who they are. But sometimes, more often than you'd think, people are ready to let go of anger that was never really theirs to begin with. I've learned that the dead don't haunt us as much as we haunt ourselves. The hollow-eyed figures weren't really my ancestors. They were the shadows cast by inherited anger, rage that had been passed down so long it had forgotten its original purpose. The real ghost isn't some spirit wandering the earth. It's the hate we carry for reasons we can't even remember, the anger we feel toward people we've never met for things that happened before we were born. But here's the thing about ghosts. They only have the power you give them. And sometimes, if you're very brave and very tired of being haunted, you can choose to let them go. The mountains are peaceful now, most days, but I still keep my radio close and my eyes open. Because somewhere in these hills, other families are carrying other grudges, other inherited anger that might be growing stronger than the people carrying it. And when that happens, they'll need someone who understands that the real enemy isn't the living or the dead. It's the hate that stands between them, hollow-eyed and hungry, waiting to devour another generation. That's why I keep doing this work. That's why I keep climbing these mountains, walking these trails, watching these valleys. Because somebody has to stand guard against the ghosts we make of our own anger. And somebody has to remember that peace is always possible, even in the deepest, darkest places where the worst of us goes to hide. My name is Marcus Hendricks, but everyone calls me Mac. I've been a park ranger for 17 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything the Cherokee National Forest could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, flash floods, even the occasional crazy person with a gun. But I was wrong. Dead wrong. It was October 1987 when it all started. The leaves had already fallen that year, making a thick carpet that crunched under your boots. The air was cold enough to see your breath, and fog hung low between the trees. I was working the Cohutta Wilderness area, way back in the deep woods where most folks never go. It's beautiful country, but it's also dangerous. You get turned around back there, and it might be days before anyone finds you. I grew up in these mountains, in a little town called Tellico Plains. My daddy worked at the paper mill until it closed down in the 70s. That's when I decided to become a ranger. I love these woods, and I'm good at my job. I've pulled people out of ravines, tracked down missing hunters, and once I even helped catch a guy who was growing marijuana back in a hidden valley. The thing is, I never believed in the old stories. The Cherokee folks have lots of tales about these mountains, about spirits and things that live in the dark places. My grandmother used to tell me about something called the Bone Man, who would steal children away if they wandered too far from home. I always figured it was just a story to keep kids from getting lost. But that October, 3 families came to my station, all crying and scared. Their kids had gone missing during day hikes. 3 different kids, 3 different days, but all in the same general area, near some old stone piles the Cherokee built long ago. The first was a little girl named Sarah, only 8 years old. Her parents said she was right behind them on the trail one minute and gone the next. They called, but no answer. The second was a boy named Tommy, age 10. Same thing. There one second, vanished the next. The third was a girl named Rebecca, 11 years old. Her older brother said she'd just stepped behind a tree and never came back out. I called in the search and rescue teams. We had dogs, helicopters, volunteers from 3 counties. I've coordinated dozens of searches before, and we usually find people within a day or 2. But this was different. The search dogs would track the kids' scent to these old stone piles. Then they'd just stop. The dogs would whine and back away, like something scared them. And there was something else strange. In all 3 spots where the kids disappeared, we found their footprints in the soft dirt. But the prints just ended at the stone piles. Not like they'd been picked up or dragged away. They just stopped, like the kids had vanished into thin air. I tried to stay positive for the families, but after 5 days of searching, I was getting worried. In 17 years, I'd never lost anyone permanently. These were good kids from good families, not the type to run away. And the area where they'd disappeared wasn't that big, maybe 5 square miles of forest. We should have found something by now. That's when Joseph Crow Feather showed up at my station. Joseph was an elder from the Cherokee Nation, probably in his 70s. He had long gray hair and wore an old denim jacket with tribal patches. He walked with a carved wooden cane, but his eyes were sharp as a hawk's. "Ranger Hendricks," he said, "we need to talk about what's taking these children." I offered him coffee, and we sat in my office. Outside, the search teams were still combing the woods, but I had a feeling they wouldn't find anything. "Those stone piles where the kids disappeared," Joseph said, "they're not just old Cherokee markers. They're warning signs. They mark the places where something evil lives." I've always tried to be respectful of Cherokee beliefs, but I needed facts, not stories. "Mr. Crowfeather, I understand you're concerned, but we're dealing with a criminal investigation here. Someone took those kids." Joseph shook his head. "Not someone, something. We call it Nvi Atsila, the bone collector. It's been taking children from these mountains for more than 150 years. He told me the story. Long ago, during the Trail of Tears, there was a Cherokee medicine man who lost his own children when the soldiers forced the tribe to leave. The pain and anger drove him mad, and he turned to dark magic to get revenge. He made a deal with evil spirits to give him power over the dead. But the magic changed him, turned him into something that wasn't human anymore. The bone collector feeds on innocence, Joseph explained. It takes children and steals their life force, their spirits. The children don't die right away. They're trapped between worlds while it slowly drains them. The bones you'll find are all that's left when it's done. I wanted to dismiss it all as superstition, but something about Joseph's voice made me listen. He wasn't trying to scare me or get attention. He was genuinely afraid. "If this thing is real," I said, "how do we stop it?" "You don't fight it with guns or dogs," Joseph said. "It's not fully in our world anymore. But there are ways to protect yourself if you know how." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small leather pouch filled with herbs and something that looked like sage. "Burn this if you see it," he said. "And whatever you do, don't let it touch you directly. It can drain your life force just like it does to the children. I took the pouch, even though I felt silly doing it. Where do you think it's hiding? Joseph pointed toward the map on my wall. There's a cave system about 2 miles past where the last child disappeared. The old ones always said that's where the bone collector lives. If those children are still alive, that's where you'll find Tot. Hem. After Joseph left, I sat in my office for a long time staring at the map. The cave system he'd pointed to was in a part of the forest I rarely patrolled. It was rough country, full of deep ravines and thick brush, but if there was even a chance the kids were alive. I was getting ready to head out when my radio crackled. It was Deputy Sheriff Mike Collins, and he sounded shaken. Mac, we found something you need to see. It's about a 1/4 mile past the third stone pile near that big oak tree. You need to get down here now. I drove my truck as far as the forest road would take me, then hiked the rest of the way. Mike was standing next to what looked like a small clearing in the trees. When I got closer, I saw what had upset him. There were bones scattered around the base of the oak tree. Small bones, arranged in careful patterns like someone had placed them there on purpose. Some of the bones looked old, yellowed with age, but others looked fresh. We found this backpack too, Mike said, holding up a small pink bag. It's got Rebecca Martinez's name on it. Rebecca was the 3rd child who'd disappeared. I knelt down and looked at the bone patterns more carefully. They formed perfect circles, with smaller bones pointing toward the center like arrows. It wasn't random. Someone or something had arranged them this way. That's when I heard it. Faint, like it was coming from underground, but definitely there. Children singing. It sounded like a lullaby, but in a language I didn't recognize. Cherokee, maybe. Mike heard it too. What the hell is that? The singing seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods, toward the cave system Joseph had mentioned. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, then looked at Mike. Call for backup, I said. And stay here. Don't follow that sound, no matter what. As I walked toward the caves, the temperature dropped 20 degrees. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost started forming on the trees around me. In October, in Tennessee. It wasn't natural. The singing got louder as I got closer to the caves. It was definitely children's voices. But there was something wrong with the melody. It made my skin crawl and my stomach feel sick. Every instinct I had was telling me to turn around and run, but those kids were counting on me. I found the cave entrance hidden behind a wall of thick bushes. The opening was just big enough for a person to squeeze through, and cold air was flowing out of it like a refrigerator. The children's singing was definitely coming from inside. I clicked on my flashlight and started to crawl through the entrance. That's when I noticed the scratches in the rock around the opening. They looked like claw marks, but they were too big to be from any animal I knew about. The singing stopped suddenly, and the woods went completely quiet. Even the insects and birds had gone silent. In the distance, I could hear Mike calling my name on the radio, but his voice sounded thin and far away. Something was watching me. I could feel its eyes on me, cold and hungry. But when I swept my flashlight beam around the cave entrance, I didn't see anything. That's when I heard the footsteps coming up behind me. I spun around, hand on my pistol, but it was just Mike. He looked pale and scared. I told you to stay put, I said. The singing stopped, he whispered. And then I heard you scream. I didn't scream. We looked at each other. If Mike had heard me scream, but I hadn't made a sound, then what had he heard? We're going in together, I decided. Stay close, and don't wander off. The cave tunnel was narrow at first, barely wide enough for both of us. Our flashlight beams cut through the darkness ahead, but they didn't seem to reach very far. The air was getting colder with every step, and our breath was forming white clouds. After about 50 yards, the tunnel opened up into a larger chamber. Our lights revealed a space about the size of a small room, with several other tunnels leading off in different directions. But what made us both stop and stare were the things arranged around the chamber walls. Children's belongings, dozens of them, backpacks, shoes, toys, pieces of clothing. Some looked recent, but others were clearly very old. There was a wooden toy horse that might have been from the 1800s, and a leather doll that was falling apart with age. "Jesus Christ," Mike whispered. In the center of the chamber, someone had arranged more bones in those same circular patterns. But these bones were different. They were polished white, like they'd been cleaned and cared for. And in the very center of each circle was a small skull. That's when we heard the children again. But this time, they weren't singing. They were crying. The sound was coming from the tunnel on our left. Mike grabbed my arm. "Mac, we need to call for backup. This is way bigger than just 3 missing kids." He was right, but my radio wasn't getting any signal this deep underground. And those children were crying for help somewhere in the darkness ahead. "5 more minutes," I said. "If we don't find them in 5 minutes, we go back and call for help." The tunnel sloped downward, and the crying got louder. But there was something else now, too. A smell like rotting meat and old bones. It made both of us gag. The tunnel opened up into an even larger chamber, and this time our flashlight beams revealed something that made my blood freeze. 3 children were sitting against the far wall, but they weren't moving. Sarah, Tommy, and Rebecca. I recognized them from the photographs their parents had given me. They were alive, because I could see them breathing, but their eyes were closed and they looked like they were sleeping, or unconscious. "Kids," I called out. "Can you hear me?" None of them responded. As we got closer, I could see that they were pale, almost white, like all the blood had been drained out of them. Their lips were blue, and their breathing was so shallow I had to look closely to see their chests moving. Mike knelt down next to Sarah and gently shook her shoulder. Sarah, can you wake up?" Her eyes opened for just a second, and she looked at us. But her eyes were completely white, no color at all, like cataracts. She tried to say something, but only a whisper came out. "Cold," she said. "So cold." That's when I realized the children were sitting in the middle of another one of those bone circles. But this circle was bigger than the others, and the bones looked fresh. Human bones, adult-sized. "We need to get them out of here right now," I said. I reached down to pick up Sarah, but the moment my hands touched her, pain shot through my arms like electricity. Not just pain. It felt like something was trying to pull the life right out of me. I jerked my hands back and staggered backward. Mike tried to grab Tommy, and the same thing happened to him. The kid was like a live wire, but instead of electricity, he was somehow draining our energy. "What the hell is wrong with them?" Mike asked. Before I could answer, we heard footsteps echoing from one of the other tunnels. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone very large was walking toward us. But there was something wrong with the sound. It was too heavy, like the footsteps were made by something much denser than a human being. Our flashlight beams swept toward the sound, and that's when we saw it. The thing that came out of the tunnel was tall, maybe 8 feet, and thin like a skeleton. But it was wearing the rotted remains of what looked like Cherokee ceremonial clothes. Feathers and beads hung from its shoulders, and around its neck was a necklace made of small white objects that I realized were human teeth. Its face was mostly bone, with just scraps of dried skin hanging from the skull. Where its eyes should have been, there were 2 black holes that seemed to suck in our flashlight beams. And its hands were just bone, with long fingers that ended in sharp points like claws. It was the bone collector, and it was looking right at us. The thing opened its mouth and let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream and wasn't quite a laugh. The sound echoed off the cave walls and seemed to go right through our bones. Both Mike and I stumbled backward, but the creature moved toward us with impossible speed. Mike drew his pistol and fired 3 shots center mass. I heard the bullets hit, but they didn't slow the creature down at all. It reached out with one skeletal hand toward Mike's face. "Don't let it touch you!" I yelled, remembering Joseph's warning. Mike ducked and rolled to the side, but he wasn't fast enough. The creature's fingers brushed against his shoulder and Mike screamed. Not a normal scream. A sound of pure agony, like his soul was being ripped apart. In seconds, Mike's hair went from brown to white. His face aged 20 years, and his body started to shrivel up like a plant in the desert. The creature was draining his life force, just like Joseph had said. I grabbed the leather pouch Joseph had given me and dumped the contents on the cave floor. Then I pulled out my lighter and set the herbs on fire. The cave filled with thick, white smoke that smelled like burning sage. The creature let out another horrible sound and jerked its hand away from Mike. The smoke seemed to hurt it, or at least annoy it. It stepped backward into the shadows, but I could still see those black eye holes watching us. Mike collapsed to the floor, breathing hard. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds, but he was still alive. "Can you walk?" I asked. He nodded weakly. "What about the kids?" I looked at Sarah, Tommy, and Rebecca. They were still unconscious, still sitting in that bone circle. But now I understood what was happening to them. The creature was slowly draining their life force, keeping them alive, but taking their energy bit by bit. If we left them here much longer, they'd end up like the other skulls in those bone circles. The smoke from Joseph's herbs was starting to clear, and I could see the creature moving closer again. We had maybe 30 seconds before it reached us. "We can't carry them," I said. "That thing has done something to them. We touch them, it drains us too." "Then what do we do?" I looked around the chamber trying to think. That's when I noticed something. The bone circles weren't just random patterns. They were connected to each other by lines of smaller bones, like a giant map or diagram. And all the lines led to one central point, a pile of bones in the corner that was bigger than all the others. It's using the bones to channel its power, I realized. If we destroy the pattern, maybe we can break its hold on the kids. The creature was getting closer. I could feel the cold radiating off it, and the temperature in the cave was dropping fast. Our breath was coming out in thick white clouds now. "Start kicking apart those bone lines," I told Mike. "Break up the patterns." We started destroying the bone arrangements as fast as we could. The creature let out another horrible sound and moved toward us faster, but every time we broke up part of the pattern, it seemed to get weaker. When we destroyed the central bone pile, the creature actually staggered backward. The 3 children stirred and opened their eyes, their normal-colored eyes. "Run!" I yelled to them. "Get out of the cave now!" Sarah, Tommy, and Rebecca were weak, but they could walk. They stumbled toward the tunnel we'd come from, with Mike helping them along. I stayed behind to face the creature alone. It was angry now, and it was coming straight for me. But Joseph's herbs were still smoldering on the cave floor, and the smoke was keeping it at bay. "You took the wrong children," I said to it. "These kids have families who love them, people who will fight for them." The creature paused, and for just a second I thought I saw something almost human in those black eye holes. Pain, maybe, or loneliness. Then it opened its mouth and spoke in a voice like wind through dead leaves. "They will come back," it whispered. "They always come back to the forest, and I will be waiting." The cave started to shake, and rocks began falling from the ceiling. The creature was bringing the whole place down around us. I ran. I made it out of the cave just as the entrance collapsed behind me. Mike and the 3 children were waiting in the forest, all of them pale and shaken but alive. The children couldn't remember much about what had happened to them, just that they'd heard singing and followed the sound. We got the kids to the hospital, where they spent a week recovering. The doctors said they were severely dehydrated and malnourished, like they hadn't eaten in days. But physically, they were going to be fine. Mike, on the other hand, never fully recovered. The aging process reversed itself somewhat, but he still looked older than his years. And sometimes, late at night, he would call me and say he could still hear the children singing in Cherokee. The official report said we'd found the children in the cave system and that it had collapsed due to natural geological instability. The bone remains were explained as an old Native American burial site that had been disturbed by illegal artifact hunters. Case closed. But I knew better, and so did Joseph Crow Feather. He came to see me a few days after we got the children out. We sat on my porch, drinking coffee, and watching the sun set over the mountains. "You did good," he said. "But you know it's not over. The cave collapsed. That thing is trapped down there." Joseph shook his head. "The bone collector isn't bound to one place. It's bound to these mountains, to the pain and anger that created it. As long as children come to these woods, it will find a way to reach them. He was right, Owen. Ere the next few months, I heard reports of other incidents. A Boy Scout troop camping near Tellico Lake reported one of their kids sleepwalking toward the forest, singing a Cherokee lullaby he'd never heard before. A family hiking the Appalachian Trail said their daughter had nightmares about a tall, thin man in feathers who wanted to take her home with him. And sometimes, late at night when I was patrolling the deep woods, I would hear it too. Children singing in the darkness, calling to anyone who would listen. I started working with Joseph and other Cherokee elders to identify the places where the bone collector was strongest. We put up new warning signs and tried to redirect hiking trails away from the most dangerous areas. But there was only so much we could do. The thing that haunted me most was what the creature had said in the cave. They always come back. Because it was true. Children are drawn to mystery and adventure. They explore, they wander. And these mountains are full of places where something dark and hungry is waiting for them. 6 months after the cave incident, my sister called to tell me that my nephew Jason was coming to visit for the summer. He was 12 years old, and he loved camping and hiking. "Can you take him into the woods?" she asked. "Show him around the forest? He's been looking forward to it for months." I looked out my window toward the tree line, where shadows were already gathering even though it was only late afternoon. Somewhere out there, the bone collector was waiting. It had lost 3 children, but it was patient. It had been patient for over 150 years. "Sure," I told my sister. "I'll take good care of him." But as I hung up the phone, I realized I was already making plans. Not for a fun camping trip with my nephew, but for a war. Because if that thing thought it was going to get another child from my family, it was in for a fight. I called Joseph Crow Feather and told him Jason was coming. "We'll need more than sage this time," I said. "I know," Joseph replied. "I've been preparing. That was 35 years ago, and I'm still here. Still a ranger, though I'm getting close to retirement now." Jason came that summer, and we had our confrontation with the bone collector. That's a story for another time, but I'll say this. My nephew lived, and he grew up to become a Cherokee Nation police officer. He protects these mountains now, too. Over the years, Mike and I developed a system. We monitor the areas where the creature is most active. We work with local schools to educate children about forest safety. And when we get reports of missing kids, we know where to look first. The bone collector is still out there. I've faced it 4 more times over the decades, and each time I've managed to save the children it was trying to take. But each time it gets a little stronger, and I get a little older. The thing about fighting something supernatural is that it changes you. I can see things now that normal people can't see. Spirits of Cherokee warriors who died defending their land. Animals that aren't quite animals. And sometimes, in the deepest parts of the forest, I can see the shadows of all the children who weren't as lucky as Sarah, Tommy, and Rebecca. The Park Service officially closed the Cohutta Wilderness area to overnight camping about 10 years ago. They cited geological instability and unexploded ordnance from old military training exercises. But really it was because too many people were reporting strange experiences, children sleepwalking, families hearing singing where no one should be singing, hikers finding bone patterns that hadn't been there the day before. I'm training my replacement now, a young woman named Amanda Torres who grew up in these mountains like I did. I've told her some of the stories, the ones I think she's ready to hear. She thinks I'm just a superstitious old man, but she listens respectfully. Last week I took her to Joseph, his grave. He passed 5 years ago at the age of 91. Before he died, he taught me most of what he knew about protecting people from the old spirits. Not everything, but enough. "You ever hear children singing Cherokee lullabies where no children should be?" I told Amanda. "You call me immediately, day or night. Don't try to handle it yourself." She nodded, but I could see the skepticism in her eyes. That's okay. I was skeptical once too. But here's what I want people to know. Cherokee National Forest is still one of the most beautiful places on Earth. Families should come here. Children should explore and learn and fall in love with nature. Just be smart about it. Stay on marked trails. Don't wander off alone. And if you hear singing in the woods where no one should be singing, don't follow the sound. Come visit our mountains. Bring your kids. But remember that some parts of the wilderness are older and stranger than we like to admit. The Cherokee people have been trying to warn us about these things for generations. We should listen. Sometimes, late at night when I'm sitting on my porch, I still hear the bone collector calling to children who might be listening. The sound drifts through the trees like wind, like an old song that won't end. But I'm still here, still watching, still fighting when I have to. And as long as there are children in these woods, I always will be. If you're ever hiking in Cherokee National Forest and you hear children singing where no children should be, remember this story. Don't follow the sound. Turn around. Walk away. And if you can, say a prayer for all the children who didn't make it home. Some things in the deep woods should stay buried, but they don't always stay that way. My name is Elizabeth Calloway, but everyone calls me Liz. I've been a park ranger for 14 years now, working the mountains of West Virginia. Before that, I spent 5 years as a state police detective. I've seen plenty of bad things: murders, missing kids, drug dealers hiding in the woods, but nothing prepared me for what happened in January of 1983. I grew up in these mountains. My grandma used to tell me stories about the old mining days when men would disappear in the tunnels and never come back. She lived through the disasters of the 1930s, when whole families starved during the worst winters anyone could remember. Hunger makes people do terrible things, Lizzie, she'd say. Things they'd never think of when their bellies are full. My specialty is missing persons cases. When someone gets lost in the Monongahela National Forest, they call me. I know every trail, every cave, every dangerous drop-off for miles around. In 14 years, I've found 23 missing people. Some were alive, some weren't. But their families always got answers. That was my job, bringing people home one way or another. I'm raising my daughter Sarah on my own. She's 8 now, smart as a whip, loves to hike with me when she can. After her daddy left when she was 3, it's just been me and her against the world. She's the reason I'm good at my job. I think about how I'd feel if she went missing, and I never stop looking. People around here have always told stories about things in the woods. Wendigo tales, mostly. Old Native American legends about cannibals who turned into monsters during harsh winters. I never put much stock in that stuff. Wendigo stories were just frontier explanations for cannibalism during harsh winters. I'd tell anyone who'd listen. When people are starving and desperate, they do things they never thought possible. The monster stories just made it easier to live with. But January 1983 was different. The worst blizzard in 50 years hit West Virginia right after New Year's. Temperature dropped to 25 below zero. Snow piled 8 feet deep in some places. The wind never stopped howling, day or night. Roads became impassable. Even the helicopters couldn't fly in that weather. I was stationed up at Dolly Sods in the wilderness area around Roarbaugh Plains. It's high country, wind-scoured plateau with stunted spruce trees and frozen boglands. On a good day, you can see for miles. But during that blizzard, you couldn't see 10 feet in front of your face. The radio crackled with static most of the time. Atmospheric conditions made communication nearly impossible. I was essentially cut off from the outside world, stuck in a warming shelter we'd set up at the trailhead. That's when the call came in. 6 college kids from West Virginia University had gone cross-country skiing 3 days earlier. They were supposed to be back by Sunday night. It was now Wednesday morning, and their emergency beacon had activated Monday evening, then went silent. Their parents were frantic. I knew those kids were in serious trouble. In weather like this, hypothermia could kill you in hours if you weren't prepared. And even experienced winter campers could get disoriented in a whiteout. I'd seen it before, people walking in circles until they collapsed from exhaustion. But something felt wrong from the start. The area where their beacon had activated was deep in the wilderness, miles from any trail. What were college kids doing way out there, and why had the beacon stopped transmitting so suddenly? I remember standing at my window that morning watching the snow blow sideways across the parking lot. The coffee in my cup had gone cold, but I didn't notice. All I could think about were 6 young people, maybe not much older than my Sarah Wub, would be someday lost somewhere in that frozen wasteland. I had no idea what was waiting for me out there in the snow. I couldn't wait for backup. The storm was getting worse, and those kids had been missing too long already. I loaded my snowshoes, emergency gear, and survival supplies into my pack. The warming shelter would have to manage without me. The ski tracks were easy to follow at first, 6 sets side by side heading north toward the deep woods. These kids knew what they were doing. Their tracks were straight and confident. But after about 2 miles, something strange happened. The tracks started to split up. One set veered sharply to the left, heading toward a cliff face that dropped 200 feet. Another set went straight up a slope so steep I had to use my hands to climb it. The other 4 tracks scattered in different directions, as if the group had suddenly panicked and run. That didn't make sense. Experienced skiers don't split up in a blizzard. You stay together, no matter what. That's Survival 101. The wind was howling so loud I could barely hear myself think. My face mask kept freezing over, forcing me to stop every few minutes to scrape ice off the breathing holes. The cold was like nothing I'd ever felt. It went right through my winter gear and settled in my bones. After following the scattered tracks for an hour, I noticed something else that bothered me. There were no animal tracks anywhere. In 14 years of winter rescues, I'd always seen signs of wildlife, deer prints, rabbit tracks, even mice trails in the snow. But here, nothing. It was like every living creature had fled the area. My radio was picking up strange signals too. Instead of the usual emergency frequencies, I kept hearing old AM radio shows from the 1940s. Big band music, radio dramas, news reports about World War II. The static would clear for a few minutes, letting these ghostly voices through, then fade back to white noise. I found their camp just before noon, or what was left of it. The skis and poles were arranged in a perfect circle around a frozen campfire. Not dropped or scattered like you'd expect from people in a panic. Arranged, like someone had deliberately placed them there. But there were no footprints leading away from the circle. No human tracks at all. Inside the circle, the snow was stained dark red. A lot of blood, frozen solid in the cold. But no bodies. I called out, hoping someone might hear me over the wind. "Hello, Park Service? Can anyone hear me?" The wind died down for just a moment, and in that silence, I heard something that made my blood freeze. A low, hungry growling sound coming from somewhere in the trees around me. Not like any animal I'd ever heard before. It sounded almost human. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. The growling stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the noise. I started searching in wider circles around the camp, looking for any sign of where the students had gone. That's when I found the first body. It was hanging upside down from a pine tree, about 50 yards from the camp. A young woman, maybe 19 or 20 years old. She'd been there for at least a day, frozen solid by the cold. Her face was locked in an expression of absolute terror, eyes wide open, mouth stretched in a scream that would never end. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what had been done to her. Someone, or something, had torn open her throat and chest. The wounds were too big to be from any animal I knew, and the way the flesh was torn, with clean bite marks along the edges. Those were human teeth. But the jaw that made those marks would have to be impossibly large. I'd seen plenty of death in my time as a cop, but this was different. This was savage, hungry, like whatever killed her had been starving. My hands were shaking as I reached for my radio. I had to report this, had to get help up here, but all I got was static, broken by those ghostly 1940 radio shows. That's when I heard footsteps in the snow behind me. I spun around, hand on my service weapon. Nothing there, just wind-blown snow and dark trees. But I could have sworn I heard something walking just at the edge of my vision. "Who's there?" I shouted. A voice answered from somewhere in the woods, a young man's voice, terrified and pleading. "Help me, please. It took the others. I'm so cold." I started toward the voice, but stopped when I realized something was wrong. The voice was coming from 3 different directions at once, and it kept repeating the same words, exactly the same way, like a broken record. "Help me, please. It took the others. I'm so cold." That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with a normal situation. Whatever was out there in the woods, it wasn't human, and it was hunting me. I didn't sleep that night. I set up an emergency shelter near the tree line where I could watch the woods and still have an escape route. Every few hours, I'd hear that voice calling for help from different directions. Sometimes it was the young man. Sometimes it was a girl, crying for her mother. Once it sounded like a child, a voice that reminded me of my Sarah. That one nearly broke me. I actually started walking toward it before I caught myself. By morning, I'd found 2 more bodies. Both had been killed the same way. Throats torn open, chest cavity ripped apart, bite marks from human teeth. But these weren't random animal attacks. The bodies had been arranged, positioned almost like offerings, and the bone marrow had been sucked out of their arm and leg bones. Detective Ray Morrison arrived the next afternoon with Dr. Sarah Chen, an anthropologist from the State University. Ray and I had worked together back when I was on the force. He was a good cop, methodical, and smart. Dr. Chen specialized in Native American folklore and had requested to join the investigation after hearing about the unusual circumstances. "Jesus, Liz," Ray said when I showed him the bodies. "What the hell happened up here?" Dr. Chen examined the marks with a magnifying glass and measuring tape. Her face went pale as she worked. "The jaw structure would have to be at least 30% larger than a normal human's," she said quietly. "And look at the canine teeth marks. They're elongated, almost like fangs." "You're saying this was done by a person?" Ray asked. "I'm saying it was done by something that used to be a person," Dr. Chen replied. "There are similar cases in the historical records. The 1890s logging camps, about 10 miles from here. Workers started disappearing during a particularly harsh winter. When they found the camp foreman, Jeremiah Pike, he was in a cabin with the remains of 5 other men. He'd been eating them." Ray looked skeptical. "And you think Pike is still alive?" "Not alive," Dr. Chen said, "but not exactly dead either. According to Ojibwe tradition, people who resort to cannibalism during extreme hunger can undergo a transformation. They become wendigos, creatures of eternal hunger that can never be satisfied." That night, the thing in the woods got bolder. We heard it moving around our camp just outside the circle of firelight. Footsteps that were too heavy to be human, but with a rhythm that was almost like walking. Ray had his pistol drawn, but I could see his hands shaking. "What do we do if it comes into camp?" "We run," Dr. Chen whispered. "Wendigos are impossibly strong and fast. Our only chance is to avoid direct confrontation." Around midnight, the footsteps stopped. The silence was worse than the noise had been. Then we heard breathing right outside our tent. Deep, raspy inhalations that sounded like air being sucked through torn flesh. "It's right there," Ray mouthed silently, pointing at the tent wall. The breathing continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then we heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A low, rumbling voice, speaking words in a language I didn't recognize. But somehow, I understood what it was saying. It was talking about hunger, about the taste of human flesh, about how long it had been since the last feeding. The voice moved around our tent, always staying just outside. Sometimes it would scratch at the fabric with what sounded like claws. Once I saw a shadow pass across the tent wall, something tall and thin, with arms that hung down to its knees. When morning came, we found tracks in the snow around our camp. They were roughly human-shaped but huge, at least 15 inches long, and they led straight up the side of a cliff face that should have been impossible to climb. "We need to get out of here," Ray said, staring at the tracks. "Call for backup. Bring in a full search team." But Dr. Chen was examining something else she'd found. scratches in the bark of nearby trees, about 8 feet off the ground. "It's territorial marking," she said. "The Wendigo is claiming this area as its hunting ground, and based on the height of these marks, we're dealing with something at least 12 feet tall." That afternoon, Ray went missing. We were following a new set of tracks when he said he needed to check something behind a cluster of boulders. When he didn't come back after 10 minutes, Dr. Chen and I went looking for him. We found his body hanging from a tree branch, 30 feet off the ground. His neck had been snapped like a twig, but the worst part was his face. It was locked in an expression of absolute terror, and his eyes seemed to be staring directly at us. That's when we saw it for the first time. The Wendigo stepped out from behind a massive pine tree, and I finally understood why the Native Americans had created legends about these creatures. It had once been human, you could tell from the basic shape, but it was wrong in every way possible. 12 feet tall, emaciated to the point where every rib showed through gray, leathery skin. Its arms were too long, hanging down past its knees, ending in hands with fingers like knife blades. And its eyes glowed with a pale, hungry light that seemed to look right through you. But the face was the worst part. It still looked partially human, but stretched and distorted. The mouth was too wide, filled with yellowed fangs, and when it smiled at us, I could see pieces of Ray still stuck between its teeth. "Run," Dr. Chen whispered. We ran. The Wendigo didn't chase us right away. It let us run, crashing through the snow and trees like panicked animals. It was playing with us, the way a cat plays with a mouse before killing it. Dr. Chen and I made it back to our abandoned camp as the sun was setting. We were exhausted, hypothermic, and running low on supplies. But more importantly, we were trapped. The Wendigo had been hurting us, using our own fear to drive us exactly where it wanted us to go. "There's an old logging cabin about a mile north," Dr. Chen said, checking her map with a shaking flashlight. "If we can make it there, we might be able to defend ourselves." "Defend ourselves with what?" I asked. "You saw how big that thing is, how fast it moves." "Fire," she said. "Wendigos fear intense heat and light. It's one of the few things that can drive them back." We gathered what supplies we could carry and headed for the cabin. The Wendigo followed us, staying just out of sight but making sure we knew it was there. Branches would crack in the darkness behind us. We'd hear that terrible breathing, getting closer and closer. The cabin was in worse shape than we'd hoped. The roof had partially collapsed and snow had drifted inside. But the fireplace still worked, and there was a stack of old dry firewood that the previous occupants had left behind. While Dr. Chen started a fire, I barricaded the door and windows with whatever I could find. Not that it would stop the Wendigo if it really wanted to get in, but it might slow it down. "Tell me about Jeremiah Pike," I said as we huddled near the fire. "He was the foreman at a logging camp in 1892, Dr. Chen said. The winter was brutal. Supplies couldn't get through and the men were starving. Pike was supposed to lead them out, but instead he convinced them to wait for rescue. When food ran out, he suggested they draw lots to see who would provide for the others. Cannibalism. It started with men who had already died from cold and hunger, but Pike developed a taste for it. He began killing the other loggers, one by one. When the spring thaw came, the rescue party found him alone in his cabin, surrounded by bones and partially eaten corpses. But Pike had changed. The hunger had transformed him into something that was no longer human. And he's been out there all this time? Wendigos don't age like humans do. They go into a kind of hibernation during warmer months when prey is scarce. But during harsh winters, when people are vulnerable and isolated, they wake up. And they hunt. That's when the Wendigo started talking to us. Its voice came from right outside the cabin walls, speaking in perfect English. "Elizabeth," it said, and hearing my name in that terrible voice made my skin crawl. "I know you're in there. I can smell your fear." I grabbed my flare gun, the only weapon I had left that might actually do some damage. "I've been watching you for days," the Wendigo continued. "You remind me of someone I knew long ago, strong, determined. But everyone breaks eventually when they get hungry enough. The voice moved around the cabin, sometimes coming from the door, sometimes from the windows. "I can make this easy for you, Elizabeth. Feed me the woman, and I'll let you walk away. You can go home to your daughter. Isn't that what you want?" At the mention of Sarah, something snapped inside me. This thing had been watching me, learning about me. It knew about my daughter. "Go to hell!" I shouted. The Wendigo laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "I've already been there, Elizabeth. Hell is hunger that can never be satisfied. Hell is eating human flesh and want it. More. I've been in hell for 90 years. The attacks on the cabin began shortly after that. The Wendigo would charge the walls, testing our defenses. Each impact shook the entire structure. I could hear wood splintering, nails pulling loose. Between attacks, it would call to us in the voices of its victims. The college students, Ray Morrison, even my grandmother's voice, telling me to give up and let the hunger in. "Don't listen," Dr. Chen warned. "It's trying to break down your psychological defenses. Wendigos feed on despair as much as flesh." But the worst moment came when the Wendigo spoke in Sarah's voice. "Mommy, where are you? I'm so cold and scared. Please come help me." I actually reached for the door before Dr. Chen grabbed my arm. "It's not her," she said firmly. "Your daughter is safe at home. The Wendigo is lying." But hearing Sarah's voice, so perfect and frightened, nearly destroyed me. I started to understand how the Wendigo had survived so long. It didn't just kill people, it used their love and fear against them. The final assault came just after midnight. The Wendigo smashed through the barricaded door like it was made of paper. I got one shot off with the flare gun, hitting its center mass. The creature screamed and stumbled backward, its chest smoking from the burning phosphorus. But it didn't stop. It kept coming, reaching for me with those impossibly long arms. That's when I remembered something my grandmother used to say. When you can't fight the monster, become one yourself. I pulled out my emergency flares, the kind used for avalanche rescue. Military grade, hot enough to melt steel. I pulled the pins on all 6 at once and threw them directly at the Wendigo. The cabin filled with brilliant white light and choking smoke. The Wendigo's screams were inhuman, a sound like metal tearing. It stumbled backward, clawing at its eyes, till Hen crashed through the cabin wall and disappeared into the night. But I knew it would be back, and next time, I might not be so lucky. Dr. Chen and I didn't wait around to see if the Wendigo would recover from the flare attack. We hiked through the night, following an old logging road that eventually connected with the main Forest Service trail. By morning, we could see the ranger station in the distance. The official report listed the incident as an animal attack, probably a bear that had been disturbed during hibernation. Ray Morrison's death was classified as an accidental fall during the rescue operation. The missing college students were presumed dead from exposure, their bodies likely consumed by scavengers. Dr. Chen tried to include her Wendigo theory in the report, but her superiors at the university convinced her to focus on the scientific facts. The Native American folklore angle was interesting for academic purposes, they said, but not appropriate for an official investigation. I knew better than to argue with the bureaucrats. Some truths are too dangerous to put in writing. The Forest Service established a permanent winter closure for the Dolly Sods Wilderness area. Officially, it was due to extreme avalanche danger caused by climate change. Unofficially, they didn't want any more people going missing during harsh winters. But I knew the Wendigo was still out there. Every winter, when the snow got deep and the temperatures dropped below zero, the missing persons reports would start coming in. Hunters who never came home, hikers who disappeared without a trace, cross-country skiers whose emergency beacons would activate briefly, then go silent. I always volunteered for those cases. Not because I wanted to face the Wendigo again, but because I was the only one who knew what to look for. The arranged ski poles, the missing animal tracks, the voices calling for help from multiple directions. Most winters I'd find evidence of its presence. Scratch marks on trees, tracks that led up impossible slopes, campsites with blood-stained snow ranged in ritual circles. But I never saw the creature itself again. I think it learned to avoid me after our encounter in the cabin. Dr. Chen moved to Arizona after the investigation. She said she needed to get somewhere warm, where winter couldn't follow her. We exchanged letters for a few years, sharing research about similar creatures in other mountain ranges. Apparently, Wendigos weren't unique to Appalachia. Every culture that experienced harsh winters had stories about people who became monsters from hunger. As for me, I never left the mountains. Someone had to keep watch to make sure the Wendigo didn't spread beyond its territory. I developed an early warning system, a network of local hunters and forest workers who knew to report unusual animal behavior or missing wildlife. The nightmares took longer to fade. For months after the incident, I'd wake up hearing Sarah's voice calling for help, begging me to come save her from the cold. I'd have to call her school to make sure she was really safe, that the Wendigo wasn't somehow using her voice to lure me back into the woods. But the worst part was the hunger. Not physical hunger. Something deeper than that. Sometimes, during the darkest moments of winter, I'd catch myself looking at other people and wondering what they would taste like. The Wendigo had touched something inside me, planted a seed of its eternal hunger. I never acted on those thoughts, but they were there, lurking in the back of my mind like a cancer. I started seeing a therapist in Charleston, driving down there twice a month to talk about work-related stress. I couldn't tell her the whole truth, but it helped to talk about the guilt and fear. Years passed. Sarah grew up and went to college, then moved to North Carolina for a job. She'd call me every winter, worried about me being alone in the mountains during the worst weather. I always told her. To her I was fine, that I knew how to take care of myself. But I never stopped watching the woods. Every winter, when the snow got deep and the wind started howling through the trees, I'd think about Jeremiah Pike, alone in his cabin, slowly transforming from man to monster. I'd wonder if the hunger could be satisfied, or if it really was eternal. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, I'd stand at my window and look out at the dark forest, remembering the Wendigo's glowing eyes, and knowing that somewhere out there, it was still hunting. Some hungers, I learned, can never be satisfied. They just wait in the darkness, growing stronger with each passing winter, ready to consume anyone foolish enough to venture too far into the woods. If you ever find yourself hiking in the Appalachian Mountains during a harsh winter, remember this story. Pay attention to the warning signs, the absence of animal tracks, the voices calling for help from impossible directions, the feeling that you're being watched by hungry eyes. And whatever you do, never trust a voice that sounds like someone you love, calling to you from the dark woods. Because some things in this world are always hungry, and they know exactly how to use your love against you. The Wendigo is still out there, waiting, watching, hunting, and winter always comes again. My name is Dave Carpenter, and I've been a park ranger for 9 years now. When people ask me what I do, I tell them I teach kids how to survive in the wild. I show them how to make fires without matches, how to find clean water, and how to sleep under the stars without being scared. I grew up in foster homes, moving from house to house until I was 18. The only place that ever felt like home was in the woods with my scout troop. That's where I learned that nature could be your friend if you knew how to listen to it. Now I work at Cranberry Wilderness in West Virginia, helping troubled kids find the same peace I found. The wilderness is a special place. No roads, no cars, no cell phone towers. Just you, the trees, and whatever lives out there with you. I love it because it's real. When a kid who's been in trouble all his life can make a fire and cook his own food, something changes in his eyes. He realizes he's stronger than he thought. August 1995 was the driest summer I'd ever seen. The streams were barely trickling, and even the old beaver ponds were turning to mud. Animals were acting strange, coming out during the day when they should have been sleeping. Bears were wandering closer to our campsites, looking for water. I was getting ready for another group of kids from a youth program in Charleston. 12 boys, ages 14 to 17, all of them in trouble with the law. Their counselors thought a week in the wilderness might help them more than another month in juvenile detention. Just camp stories to keep kids from wandering off at night. I told my supervisor when she mentioned the old legends about something that crawled through these woods. Every wilderness area has its ghost stories. Bigfoot, strange lights, monsters in the lakes. I'd heard them all, and I'd never seen anything I couldn't explain. The Falls of Hills Creek area was my favorite spot for these programs. 3 waterfalls cascade down the mountainside, and even during the drought, there was still some water flowing. The sound of falling water helps kids sleep better their first night away from the city. I was checking the campsites when I found the first strange thing. Deep grooves in the mud near the middle waterfall, like something heavy had been dragged across the ground. But the marks were weird. They looked like finger marks, but way too long and spread too far apart, and there were no footprints anywhere nearby. Probably just a bear with long claws, I told myself, taking pictures with my camera. Bears will drag logs around when they're looking for bugs to eat. But something about those marks made my skin crawl. That evening, I set up my own camp about a quarter mile from where the kids would be sleeping. Close enough to help if they needed me, far enough away to let them feel independent. I'd done this same setup dozens of times, but as the sun went down, something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet. During summer nights, you should hear crickets, frogs, owls calling to each other. Instead, there was nothing. Even the wind seemed to have stopped moving through the trees. I lay in my sleeping bag, listening to the silence. In 9 years of wilderness work, I'd never heard anything like it. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. The first call came at 6 a.m. from Marcus, one of the youth counselors. "Dave, we need you down here. Something happened last night and the boys are pretty shaken up." I found the group huddled around their cold campfire, 12 teenagers who usually acted tough-looking, scared as little kids. Marcus pulled me aside while his partner Sarah tried to get them to eat breakfast. Around 2 a.m., Tommy started screaming, Marcus whispered. Said something was dragging him out of his tent. When we got to him, he was 20 feet from his sleeping bag, still unconscious. But get this, there were these drag marks in the dirt, like something had pulled him by his feet. I looked at Tommy, a skinny 15-year-old from Huntington. He was sitting by himself, staring at nothing. "Did anyone see what did it?" I asked. "That's the weird part," Sarah said. "We all heard movement around the camp, but when we turned on our flashlights, there was nothing there. Just Tommy lying in the dirt like he'd sleepwalked, except his eyes were wide open and he wouldn't respond to us for almost 10 minutes. I checked the drag marks. They were similar to what I'd found by the waterfall, but these were clearly made by something pulling a human body. The strange part was how the marks just stopped, like whatever did it had picked Tommy up and carried him the rest of the way. "Let me talk to him," I said. Tommy looked up when I sat beside him. His eyes were bloodshot and confused. "I wasn't sleepwalking," he said quietly. "Something grabbed my ankles and started pulling me. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. It felt like I was dreaming and awake at the same time." "What did you see?" "Long arms, really long, like they could stretch across the whole campsite. And it moved wrong, like it was crawling, but way too fast." He shuddered. It smelled like wet dirt and old leaves. I spent the morning looking for tracks, but the ground was too dry and hard to show much. Whatever had moved through the camp was smart enough to avoid the soft spots where it might leave clear prints. By noon, I was ready to chalk it up to sleepwalking and group hysteria until I found Tommy's water bottle. It was hanging 15 feet up in a tree, tied there with strips of bark. No human could have climbed that smooth trunk, and why would they? That afternoon, I called John Whitehorse, a Cherokee consultant who sometimes helped with our cultural programs. If there were old stories about this area, he would know them. "Kekla Kudla," he said when I described what happened. "My grandfather told me stories about the crawling shadow. It's old, older than our people coming to these mountains. It steals breath and dreams from sleeping people." "John, I need facts, not legends." "The facts are in the legends, Dave. It comes during droughts when the water is low. It's drawn to people with wounded spirits, especially the young ones. Your boys from the city, they're carrying a lot of pain, aren't they?" They were. Every kid in this program had been through trauma that would break most adults. Abuse, neglect, violence, drugs. That's why they were here instead of in jail. What does it want? To help, I think. But it doesn't understand that taking someone's nightmares can kill them. That night, I set up motion sensors around the campsite and stayed awake with my camera ready. The counselors took turns on watch, and we made sure no one slept alone. Around 1 a.m., the motion sensors started going off one by one in a pattern that circled the camp, but our flashlights showed nothing moving. It was like something invisible was testing our defenses. Then all the sensors went silent at the same time. I was checking the perimeter when I heard Sarah scream. I ran back to find her standing over Devon's empty sleeping bag. Another boy, unconscious, dragged 30 feet from where he'd been sleeping. This time there were witnesses. "It was huge," said Marcus, his voice shaking. "Maybe 8 feet long, but moving on all fours like an animal. Its arms were longer than its whole body, and it moved like water, just flowing across the ground." When Devon woke up, he couldn't remember anything after falling asleep. But he kept saying the same thing Tommy had. I couldn't move, but I wasn't really asleep. I made the decision to move the group to a different campsite, closer to the main trail where we could get help faster. But as we packed up our gear, I realized we were being watched. There, about 50 yards away in the shadow of the trees, something was crouched low to the ground. It looked almost human, but the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, the torso too narrow, and it was perfectly still in a way that made my skin crawl. I blinked, and it was gone. We set up the new camp near Dogway Fork, where 3 trails meet, and we could get to the parking area in an hour if we needed to. But I knew it wouldn't matter. Whatever was hunting us could move through any terrain faster than we could run. That day, I called my supervisor and asked for backup. Dr. Angela Chen, an anthropologist from West Virginia University who studied Appalachian folklore, and Dr. Michael Torres, a sleep specialist who worked with trauma victims. If this was some kind of mass hysteria, they'd figure it out. If it was something else, I'd need all the help I could get. They arrived that evening with monitoring equipment and cameras that could see in complete darkness. Dr. Chen was excited about the possibility of documenting an unknown cultural phenomenon. Dr. Torres was convinced we were dealing with a rare form of group sleep disorder triggered by the isolation and stress. I wasn't convinced of anything anymore. The boys were getting worse. During the day, they seemed normal, learning wilderness skills and even laughing sometimes. But as soon as the sun started going down, they'd all huddle together, scared to close their eyes. "It's in our dreams," Tommy told me. "Even when we're awake, we can see it moving around the edges, waiting for us to fall asleep." Dr. Torres hooked up his monitoring equipment to measure brain waves while the boys slept. What he found didn't make any sense. "Their brain patterns show they're in deep sleep, but their eyes are tracking movement," he said, staring at his computer screen. "It's like they're awake and asleep at the same time, watching something we can't see." On the third night, it took Marcus. I was reviewing the footage from Dr. Chen's infrared cameras when we heard the scream. We ran to the CA, couldn't move, couldn't scream, but I wasn't unconscious. I could see through the tent fabric as the creature lifted me effortlessly and carried me deeper into the woods. Its arms moved like liquid, stretching and contracting as it navigated through the trees. It brought me to a cave behind the main waterfall, where the walls were covered in those ancient petroglyphs. And there, in the dim light filtering through the water, I finally saw it clearly. The nightcrawler was beautiful in a terrible way. Its skin was pale and smooth like riverstone, its limbs graceful despite their impossible length. Its eyes were large and dark, and when it looked at me, I could feel it reading my thoughts, my memories, my deepest fears. Then it showed me what it had been trying to do. In the cave behind the waterfall, surrounded by 1,000-year-old drawings of the same creature that held me, I experienced something I'll never be able to fully explain. The nightcrawler didn't just communicate with me. It shared its memories, its purpose, its ancient loneliness. I saw the first humans who had encountered it, indigenous people who understood what it was trying to do. They had worked together, the creature carefully taking small pieces of trauma and pain, helping their children heal from the wounds that life in a harsh world inevitably caused. But then the people had left, and new ones came who didn't understand. They saw only a monster, something to be feared and driven away. The creature had retreated deeper into the wilderness, emerging only when it sensed children in terrible pain, trying to help the only way it knew how. "You're killing them," I managed to say, though I'm not sure if I spoke out loud or just thought it. The creature's response flooded through my mind like water. It showed me Marcus, Tommy, Devon, all the boys it had touched. Their nightmares were indeed fading, their trauma healing. But the process was too intense, too fast. Like trying to drain an infected wound all at once instead of letting it heal slowly. Then it showed me something else. My own memories. Growing up in foster care, never knowing if the adults around me would hurt or help me. The loneliness, the fear, the certainty that I was worthless and unwanted. I felt those memories being gently lifted away, not erased, but made softer, less sharp. The creature was trying to heal me too, but with a delicate touch that didn't overwhelm my mind. That's when I understood. It had been learning from its mistakes with the boys. It could control the process, but it needed guidance from someone who understood both trauma and healing. "I can teach you," I said. "I work with kids like this every day. There are ways to help that don't hurt." What happened next was like nothing I could have imagined. The creature opened its mind completely to me, sharing not just its memories, but its essence. I felt its genuine desire to help, its confusion at why its efforts caused fear instead of gratitude, its deep sadness at being alone for so many centuries. But I also felt its incredible power. This being could enter the dream space where trauma lives, could literally absorb and process psychological wounds. It was like having a supernatural therapist, if only it could learn to work with human limitations. For what felt like hours, I shared everything I knew about trauma therapy, about building trust with damaged children, about healing at a pace the mind could handle. The creature absorbed it all, its understanding growing with each concept I showed it. Then Dr. Chen's scream echoed through the cave. The creature had left the monitoring equipment running, and through its extended senses, it could see what was happening back at the camp. Dr. Torres had been trying to document the brainwave path, to turns during one of the creature's visits, but something had gone wrong. We rushed back to find Dr. Torres on the ground, his body rigid, his eyes rolled back in his head. The monitoring equipment showed brain activity that looked like a continuous seizure. "It tried to show him everything at once," Dr. Chen said, tears streaming down her face. "All the memories, all the trauma it's absorbed over the centuries. His mind couldn't handle it." Dr. Torres died that night, his brain simply overwhelmed by the flood of traumatic memories from hundreds of victims over thousands of years. I realized then how dangerous this creature truly was, even when it was trying to help. Its power was too vast for most human minds to safely interface with. "You have to be more careful," I told it as we stood over Dr. Torres's body. "Humans are fragile. We can only handle small amounts of healing at a time." The creature's response was a wave of grief and guilt that nearly knocked me unconscious. It hadn't meant to kill Dr. Torres. It had been excited to finally communicate with someone who might understand its scientific nature, and it had shared too much, too quickly. But there was something else in its emotion. A new understanding. It was learning that healing, real healing, required patience, trust, and careful attention to the person being helped. Over the next 2 days, I watched it work with the boys using the techniques I had shared with it. Instead of forcefully draining their nightmares, it would sit at the edge of their dreams, gently drawing out small pieces of trauma and processing them slowly. The results were remarkable. The boys were sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. Their aggressive behavior softened. They started talking about their feelings instead of acting them out. But I also knew this couldn't continue the way it was. The creature needed boundaries, rules, a way to help without accidentally destroying the people it was trying to heal. 6 months later, I submitted my report to the National Park Service. Officially, Dr. Torres died of a rare brain aneurysm, probably brought on by the stress of working in extreme wilderness conditions. The boys from the youth program showed remarkable improvement in their psychological evaluations, attributed to the therapeutic effects of wilderness immersion. Unofficially, things changed in ways I'm still trying to understand. The wilderness therapy program at Cranberry became famous for its success rates. Kids who had been written off by every other treatment program would spend a week with us and come back fundamentally different. Calmer, more confident, sleeping through the night for the first time in years. What they didn't know was that they were receiving help from something that had been perfecting trauma therapy for centuries. The Nightcrawler and I developed a system. I would screen the children who came through our program, identifying those with the deepest wounds, the most severe nightmares. During their stay, the creature would work with them in their dreams, but gently, taking only what they were ready to release. I became its partner in healing, teaching it about human psychology, about the careful balance between helping and harming. In return, it showed me things about trauma and memory that no human therapist had ever understood. I learned that trauma isn't just stored in the mind. It lives in a space between waking and sleeping, in the realm where dreams and reality meet. The creature existed partly in that space, which was why it could access and heal wounds that traditional therapy could barely touch. But there were rules. The person being helped had to be willing, even if they didn't consciously understand what was happening. The healing had to happen slowly, over several nights, allowing the mind to adjust to each small change. And most importantly, the creature could never work alone. It needed a human partner who could understand and guide the process. I also discovered that the creature had been changing too. Contact with human minds over the centuries had made it more complex, more emotionally sophisticated. It was no longer just an ancient entity following its nature. It was learning to be something like a therapist, a healer, even a friend. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone in the wilderness, I can sense it moving through the forest, checking on its former patients, making sure their healing is holding. It's become a guardian of sorts, watching over damaged children even after they've returned to their regular lives. The boys from that first group all graduated from high school, most went to college. None of them remember exactly what happened during their week in the wilderness, but they all say it changed their lives. Tommy became a social worker, Devin joined the military, and now helps other veterans deal with PTSD. Marcus became a wilderness guide himself, working with at-risk youth. They don't remember the Nightcrawler, but sometimes they have dreams about being helped by something they can't quite see, something that took away their pain and left peace in its place. I still work at Cranberry Wilderness, still bring troubled kids into the forest to learn survival skills and find healing. But now I know that some of them are receiving help from a therapist older and more experienced than any human practitioner. The ancient petroglyphs in the cave tell the story of a partnership between humans and something beyond human understanding. For a while, that partnership was lost, leaving the creature to stumble through centuries of well-meaning but dangerous attempts to help. Now it's been restored, and children who might have been lost to their trauma are finding their way to peace. If you ever find yourself camping in deep wilderness, especially places with old legends about strange creatures, pay attention to your dreams. If you wake up feeling strangely rested, like invisible weight has been lifted from your shoulders, you might have been visited by something trying to help. Just remember, healing is a partnership. Even supernatural therapists work better when they have a human colleague to guide them. And if you're ever planning a wilderness therapy program, maybe give me a call. I've learned a few things about helping damaged kids find peace in the forest. Some of those things aren't in any textbook, but they work better than anything modern psychology has figured out. The Nightcrawler is still out there, still helping, still learning, and I'm still teaching it how to heal without harm, how to touch broken minds with the gentleness they need to become whole again. It's the strangest therapeutic partnership in history, but it might also be the most effective. My name is Michael Stonecrow, but everyone just calls me Mike. I've been a park ranger at Pine Mountain State Resort Park in Kentucky for 16 years now. Before that, I was a medic in the Gulf War. Saw things there that made me want to find some peace in the mountains. I'm part Cherokee on my mother's side, though I'll admit I didn't pay much attention to that growing up. My specialty here at the park is emergency medical response. When someone gets hurt bad in the backcountry, they call me. I've pulled people off cliffs, treated heart attacks on remote trails, and coordinated more helicopter rescues than I can count. Pine Mountain isn't like other parks. The ridges are steep and rocky, covered in thick patches of rhododendron that can hide a man completely. Radio signals bounce funny off the sandstone cliffs, and cell phones are useless in most areas. If something goes wrong out there, you're on your own until help can reach you. It was June 1988, and we were in the middle of the worst heat wave I'd ever seen. Temperatures hit over 100 degrees for days straight. The animals were acting strange. Deer coming down to the roads at midday, birds flying in confused circles. Even the park's search and rescue dogs seemed nervous and wouldn't track properly in certain areas. The first weird report came from a family hiking near Chained Rock. They said they'd met another family on the trail, a father, mother, and 2 kids, who gave them directions to a scenic overlook. Problem was, when they got back to the visitor center, they saw the exact same family checking in. Same clothes, same faces, everything. When they asked about the trail directions, the family looked confused and said they'd never been on that trail before. I figured it was the heat playing tricks on people's minds. Heat exhaustion can make you see all sorts of things that aren't there. But then, more report started coming in. Hikers were running into people they knew, friends, family members, even other park visitors, in impossible places. People who should have been miles away, or hadn't even arrived at the park yet. The Cherokee elder who lived just outside the park, old Joseph Crowfeather, came to see me about the 3rd day of reports. Joseph was in his 80s and had lived in these mountains his whole life. His weathered hands shook as he spoke. "Mike," he said, using my first name like he always did, "your people are reporting at Sila Saku, the ones who wear stolen faces." I respected Joseph, but I'd always been practical about that old folklore stuff. "Joseph, you know skinwalkers are Navajo legends. Cherokee don't have shapeshifters." His dark eyes got serious. "Cherokee have something worse. We have people who lost their way so completely, they forgot who they were supposed to be." I should have listened to him. The next morning, I was doing my regular patrol when my radio crackled with Ranger Susan Martinez's voice. Susan was my patrol partner, a tough woman in her 40s who'd transferred from Yellowstone 2 years back. "Mike, I need you to meet me at the Laurel Cove Trail. Got a situation here." When I found her, Susan was standing next to a pile of clothes folded neatly on a flat rock. Hiking boots, jeans, a University of Kentucky t-shirt, and a wallet. "Belongs to David Chen," she said, showing me the driver's license. "Family reported him missing this morning. But here's the thing. I just saw David Chen not 20 minutes ago, hiking with his wife back toward the main lodge. He was wearing these exact clothes." I picked up the shirt. It was still warm, like someone had just taken it off. "You sure it was him?" "Positive. I talked to him about trail conditions. Same voice, same face. Even had that little scar on his chin from when he fell off his beat." "Ike is a kid. How do you know about his scar?" Susan looked uncomfortable. "He told me about it yesterday when they checked in. But Mike, if he was just here talking to me, why are his clothes sitting here like he vanished right out of them?" We searched the area but found nothing. No tracks leading away from the rock, no signs of struggle. Just the clothes, warm as if they'd been worn seconds before. That afternoon, David Chen's wife came to the ranger station, hysterical. She said she'd been hiking with her husband when he'd stopped to tie his shoe. She'd kept walking, expecting him to catch up. When she turned around 5 minutes later, he was gone. No trace, no sound, nothing. "But I saw you both this morning," Susan said. "You were both heading back to the lodge together." Mrs. Chen stared at her. "That's impossible. David disappeared yesterday afternoon. I've been looking for him all night." The hair on my arm stood up. I'd been a medic long enough to know when someone was telling the truth, and Mrs. Chen wasn't lying. Neither was Susan. That evening, I was filling out the missing person report when I heard familiar laughter outside the ranger station. Through the window, I saw David Chen walking past with his wife, both of them carrying ice cream cones from the lodge gift shop. He looked perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. I ran outside, but by the time I got there, they were gone. The only thing left was 2 ice cream cones melting in perfect circles on the hot pavement. My radio buzzed. It was Susan again, but her voice sounded wrong somehow. Too calm, too flat. "Mike, I found David Chen. He's fine. False alarm. Family was just confused about the timeline." "Susan, where are you?" "Back at the station. Come on back and we'll close the file." I looked at the ranger station. All the lights were off and Susan's patrol truck wasn't in the parking lot. According to my watch, I'd been inside the station the whole time and no one had come or gone. "Susan, what's your location?" Silence. Then, in a voice that sounded exactly like Susan but some, "How wasn't her?" "I'm wherever you need me to be, Mike." The radio went dead. I spent that night in my cabin, door locked, going over every detail. My training told me there had to be a logical explanation. People don't just vanish out of their clothes. Radios don't lie about locations. But my gut told me something was hunting in these mountains, something that could look like anyone it wanted to. The next morning, I drove to Susan's house to check on her. She answered the door looking perfectly normal, but when I asked about the radio call, she had no memory of it. "Mike, I was home all evening. Check the call log if you want." I did. According to the radio log, Susan Martinez had never called in. But I had the recording on my personal backup device, and when I played it back, it was definitely her voice. More reports flooded in over the next 2 days. A group of college kids swore they'd met their professor on the trail, but the professor was teaching summer classes 3 hours away. An elderly man reported seeing his deceased wife walking the nature trail, looking exactly as she had 20 years ago. FBI profiler Agent Sarah Coleman arrived on Thursday morning, along with Dr. James Whitehawk, a cultural expert from the Cherokee Nation. Agent Coleman was all business. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, and a notebook full of psychological profiles. "We're dealing with either mass hysteria or an elaborate hoax," she said during our first meeting. "People don't just copy other people perfectly." Dr. Whitehawk was quieter, more thoughtful. He spent the first day interviewing Joseph Crow Feather and other Cherokee elders in the area. When he came back, his face was grim. "Agent Coleman, this isn't hysteria. The Cherokee have stories about this phenomenon going back generations. Spirits of those who died traumatic deaths, trying to live the lives they never got to finish." Dr. W's. "Whitehawk, with respect, we need evidence, not folklore." That's when I saw him. My father. He was standing by the trail marker near Chained Rock, wearing his old Army uniform, looking exactly as he had the day he left for Vietnam in 1969, the day he never came home from. "Hello, son," he said when I approached. His voice was perfect, down to the slight accent from growing up in eastern Kentucky. "I've been waiting for you." My knees almost gave out. "Dad? I know you've got questions, Mike, about what happened over there, about why I never made it home. Walk with me." Every rational part of my brain screamed that this was impossible. My father had been dead for 19 years, but he looked so real, so solid, even smelled like Old Spice aftershave, just like I remembered. We walked for maybe 10 minutes, him telling me stories I'd never heard about his childhood, about meeting my mother, about how proud he was of what I'd become. Stories that felt true, that felt like things only my father would know. Then he said something that stopped me cold. "You know, Mike, I never really liked that Cherokee stuff your mother was always talking about. All that spiritual nonsense just gets in the way of living a real life." My father had been the one who encouraged me to learn about my Cherokee heritage. He'd taken me to powwows, taught me to respect the old ways. He would never have said those words. I looked at him more carefully. The uniform was perfect, but it was too clean. No wear marks, no fading. His face was right, but his eyes were empty, like looking at a photograph instead of a person. "You're not my father." The thing wearing my father's face smiled, and for just a second, I saw something else underneath. Something hungry and lost and desperate. "I could be," it said. I could be your father, your mother, your best friend. Anyone you want me to be. Anyone you need. I ran. When I got back to the ranger station, Agent Coleman was waiting with Dr. Whitehawk and Susan. But as soon as I saw Susan, I knew something was wrong. She was standing too straight, too still. When she looked at me, she didn't blink. Mike, she said in Susan's voice, we need to talk about what you saw out there. What's my middle name, Susan? She paused, just a fraction too long. Michael. That's my first name. What's my middle name? The thing wearing Susan's face tilted its head slightly. Does it matter? Names are just sounds. I'm still Susan. Agent Coleman drew her weapon. Step away from him. Agent Coleman, Dr. Whitehawk said softly. That's not Susan Martinez. The fake Susan turned to look at Dr. Whitehawk, and I saw her face change. Not dramatically, just little shifts. The nose became slightly different, the eyes a shade darker. She was becoming someone else. Dr. Whitehawk, she said, now in a voice I didn't recognize. You understand, don't you? We just want to live. We just want to feel what it's like to be alive. I understand, he said gently. But not like this. Not by stealing. The thing that had been Susan let out a sound that was part sob, part scream. Then it was gone, leaving behind an empty set of ranger clothes and the smell of pine smoke. My radio crackled. Susan's real voice came through, frightened and confused. Mike, where am I? I was in my house and now I'm naked in the woods near Devil's Canyon. What's happening to me? We found the real Susan 3 miles from the ranger station, wrapped in an emergency blanket and shaking from shock. She had no memory of the past 3 days. Dr. Whitehawk examined her and said she was suffering from what the Cherokee called spirit drain. Something had been slowly stealing pieces of her life force. They're not just copying people, Dr. Whitehawk explained as we set up camp that night. They're actually taking over, bit by bit. The longer they wear someone's face, the more they absorb that person's essence. Eventually, the original person fades away completely. Agent Coleman was scanning the tree line with night vision goggles. So we're dealing with some kind of psychic vampires? Worse. We're dealing with the spirits of Cherokee who died during the forced removal in the 1830s. They were torn from their homes, their families, their entire way of life. Many died on the march west, but some spirits got trapped here, in the place they were stolen from. Joseph Crow Feather had joined us, despite being over 80 years old. They died incomplete, he said. Never got to live the lives they were meant to have. Never got to see their children grow up. Never got to grow old with their loved ones. So they try to steal those experiences from others. But why now? I asked. Why after all these years? The heat wave, Dr. Whitehawk said. It stirred up the spiritual energy in these mountains, made the barrier between the living and the dead thinner. That's when I saw myself. He was standing at the edge of our campfire light, wearing my exact uniform, my face, even the small scar on my hand from a childhood accident. But his eyes held something mine never had, a deep, endless sadness. Hello, Mike, he said in my voice. I've been wearing you for a while now, learning how to be you. Agent Coleman raised her weapon, but the other me just smiled sadly. You can't shoot me without shooting him. We're connected now. I've been taking little pieces of Mike's life every day, his memories, his feelings, his connections to other people. Soon there won't be enough of the original left to matter. I could feel it now, like something cold spreading through my chest. Memories that felt fuzzy around the edges, emotions that seemed muted. I was fading, and this thing was filling up with everything that made me who I was. Why me? I asked. Because you're strong. Because you help people. Because you have something we never got to have, a purpose, a life that matters. The other me stepped closer. I died when I was 16, Mike. Died cold and hungry and scared on a trail leading away from everything I loved. I never jits. To become a man, never got to help people, never got to matter. I understood then. This wasn't evil. Not really. It was grief so deep it had outlasted death itself. But you're killing me to do it. I'm completing us both. Joseph Crow Feather stepped forward, his weathered hands holding a bundle of sage and sweetgrass. Young one, he said to my double, your pain is real, but this path leads only to more death. You cannot heal a wound by inflicting it on others. The other me turned, and for a moment, I saw through his stolen face to what lay beneath. A young Cherokee boy, eyes full of loss and longing, still wearing the clothes he'd died in over 150 years ago. Grandfather, the spirit said, using the respectful term, I just want to live. You are living, Joseph replied, but not in the way you were meant to. Come, let me help you find your true path. Joseph began to sing, a low Cherokee morning song that seemed to echo off the mountain walls. The other me started to fade around the edges, becoming translucent. I don't want to go, he whispered. I don't want to be alone again. You won't be alone, Joseph promised. Your people are waiting. The ones who crossed over before you, the ones who found peace. They've been calling for you. The spirit looked at me one last time. Will you remember me, Mike? Will you remember that I was here? I felt the cold leaving my chest, my memories becoming clear again. I'll remember. He smiled, my smile, but somehow different, peaceful. Thank you. The spirit dissolved like morning mist, and I felt whole again. We spent the next week documenting everything and helping the other victims recover. Agent Coleman's official report classified the incident as mass hysteria brought on by environmental stressors. But I know she believed what really happened. Dr. Whitehawk worked with Joseph Crow Feather to perform proper mourning ceremonies for the trapped spirits. They found 17 locations where Cherokee had died during the forced removal, all within the park boundaries, all unmarked, all forgotten, until now. Susan recovered fully, though she still gets nervous when she sees her own reflection sometimes. The Chen family was found safe. David had been wandering the mountains in a daze for days, with no memory of where he'd been. I requested a meeting with the park superintendent and the Cherokee Nation leadership. Within 6 months, we had established a Cherokee memorial garden at the park, with a plaque listing the names of those who died during the removal. It seemed like the least we could do. But I still see them sometimes, out of the corner of my eye. Not stealing faces anymore, just watching, making sure they're not forgotten again. People ask me how I can tell the difference now between what's real and what might be a spirit wearing a stolen face. It's simple, really. The copies can look perfect, sound perfect, even act perfect for a while. But they can't fake the connections that make us who we are. The love, the loss, the memories that shape us into individuals. Identity isn't just what you look like or sound like. It's the scars you carry, the people who shaped you, the choices you've made that nobody else knows about. It's the weight of your own history, both good and bad. I've learned to honor my Cherokee heritage more in the years since. I work with Dr. Whitehawk now on cultural preservation projects, and I visit Joseph Crow Feather regularly to learn the old stories. Because the dead deserve to be remembered properly, not to have to steal life from the living, just to feel like they mattered. Pine Mountain is quiet now mostly, but sometimes when the mist rises from the valleys in the early morning, I can still hear them singing. Not the hungry, desperate song of the trapped spirits, but the peaceful song of those who have found their way home. And I sing with them sometimes, because they were here first, and their stories deserve to be told. Here's when people start looking like someone else entirely. Remember this: the face you see might not be the person you think you know, but underneath every stolen identity is a story of loss that goes deeper than death itself. The skin thieves of Pine Mountain taught me that we're all just trying to figure out who we really are, and some of us need help finding our way home,